The stagecoach lurched to a stop in a cloud of dust so thick Eliza tasted it before she saw where they'd dumped her. Middle of nowhere, that's what the driver had called it, when she'd paid her last $3 for the fare. He hadn't been wrong. The road, if you could call two worn ruts a road, stretched in both directions through scrubland that looked like it had given up on being pretty about 60 years back. No trees, no buildings, just endless brown earth, gray-green brush, and a sky so big it made her feel like an insect. "This is it," the driver said, not even looking at her. He was already reaching for her bag. Eliza climbed down, her boots hitting packed dirt that felt hard as stone. Everything hurt. 3 days on that coach, sleeping in fits between stops, eating nothing but stale bread she'd wrapped in cloth before leaving, before being forced to leave. She took the bag from him, light, because she didn't own much worth carrying, and watched the coach pull away without another word. Didn't even wait to see if she'd be all right. Why would he? Women like her didn't get courtesy. They got what they got and were supposed to be grateful it wasn't worse. The ranch house sat maybe a quarter-mile off, low and dark against the horizon. Barn beside it, corral, a few outbuildings that looked like they'd been hammered together by someone who cared more about function than form. Smoke came from the chimney in a thin gray line. Someone was home. Eliza started walking. Her dress, the only decent one she still had, was covered in dust by the time she reached the porch. The hem had torn somewhere back in town during the incident that had made staying impossible. She'd tried to mend it, hadn't done a great job. Another thing she wasn't particularly good at: sewing, cooking, keeping her mouth shut when men said things that made her blood hot. That last one had always been her biggest problem. She stopped at the bottom of the steps, looking up at the door. Heavy wood, weathered gray. No wreath, no decoration, nothing that suggested anyone inside gave a damn about making things welcoming. The windows on either side were dark, curtains drawn, or maybe just no curtains at all. This was it. The last place that would even consider taking her. She'd written ahead, 3 weeks ago, right after Reverend Michaels had stood up in front of the whole congregation and said her name like it was a disease. Right after the women had started crossing the street when they saw her coming. Right after the store owner had told her she wasn't welcome to buy supplies anymore unless she paid double. Cash up front, no credit. The letter had been short. "I'm a hard worker. I can cook, clean, mend, handle animals. I don't need much. Just a place to work and a roof that doesn't leak." She hadn't mentioned why she needed to leave. Figured he'd hear about it anyway if he asked around. Bad news traveled faster than good. His reply had been shorter. "Come if you want. No pay first year, food and shelter. Works hard. Don't expect soft treatment. No signature. Just an address and the name, Vance Ranch." She'd asked around carefully about Caleb Vance. Hadn't gotten much. Keeps to himself. Lost his wife some years back. Doesn't come to town much. Doesn't smile, that one. Hard man, fair maybe, but hard. And then from old Susan Miller, who'd lived in the territory since before statehood. "If you're thinking of going out there, girl, you better be sure. He's not the forgiving type, and he's not the type to send you packing gentle if you don't work out." Eliza had been sure. Or at least, she'd been out of options, which felt like the same thing. She climbed the steps. 3 of them, wood worn smooth in the centers from years of boots, knocked twice, firm, on the door. Nothing. She waited, counted to 30, knocked again. The door opened so fast she stepped back. The man standing there was tall, over 6 feet, easy, and built like he'd spent every day of his life doing work that required muscle. Dark hair, longer than was fashionable, pulled back loose at his neck. Face that looked like it had been carved with a dull blade. Strong jaw, sharp cheekbones, lines around his eyes and mouth that spoke of sun and wind and not much laughter. Maybe 40, maybe younger, but aged by the kind of life that ground people down. He looked at her like she was a problem he hadn't wanted to deal with today. "Eliza Hart," she said before he could speak. "I wrote. You wrote back." His eyes, dark gray like storm clouds, moved from her face down to her bag and back up, taking inventory, measuring. "You're late," he said, voice rough, like he didn't use it much. "Stagecoach broke an axle outside of job. Don't care why. You're still late." He stepped back from the door. "You coming in or not?" Not exactly welcoming, but she hadn't expected welcoming. She picked up her bag and followed him inside. The interior matched the exterior, functional, sparse, clean enough, but with no decoration except what was necessary. Main room with a stone fireplace, table with 4 chairs, a couple of wooden rockers that had seen better days. Kitchen area off to one side, door to what was probably a bedroom on the other. Everything wood and stone and iron. Nothing soft except a single blanket folded over one of the rockers. "You'll sleep in the back room," Caleb said, moving toward the kitchen without looking at her. "Used to be storage. Cleaned it out. There's a bed frame, no mattress yet. I'll get one in town next week if you're still here." "I'll be here," Eliza said. He turned, looked at her straight. "Maybe." He poured coffee from a pot on the stove into a tin cup, didn't offer her any, and sat down at the table. "Rules," he said. "You work dawn to dark, same as me. Meals are at 6, noon, and 6. You miss them. You go hungry. You break something. You fix it, or pay for it. You make trouble. You leave. No second chances." "What counts as trouble?" Eliza asked. "I'll know it when I see it." She set her bag down by the door. "The letter said no pay first year." "What about after?" "After a year, we'll see if you're worth paying." "And if I'm not?" "Then you'll leave." "Fair enough. Brutal, but fair." She could work with brutal. "Where's the back room?" she asked. He nodded toward a narrow door she hadn't noticed, half hidden behind the kitchen area. "Through there. Washrooms outside, around the side of the house. Don't waste water. We're heading into dry season." Eliza picked up her bag and walked to the door. The room beyond was small, maybe 8 by 10, with a single window, currently shuttered. The bed frame was iron, old but sturdy. No mattress like he'd said. Floor was wood plank, swept clean, one shelf on the wall, empty. A nail for hanging clothes. She'd had worse. She set her bag on the floor and turned to find Caleb standing in the doorway, watching her. "You run from something or run toward something?" he asked. "Does it matter?" "Might." She met his eyes, didn't look away. "I didn't run. I was pushed." He considered that for a moment, then nodded once. "Supper's in 2 hours. Don't be late for that either." He turned and walked away. Eliza stood in the small room, listening to his boots on the floor, the scrape of a chair as he sat back down at the table. Outside, wind rattled the shutters. Somewhere distant, a crow called. She was 26 years old, had been engaged once and cast aside, had watched her father drink himself to death, and her mother follow him into the grave from heartbreak, had worked as a seamstress, a laundress, a cook, and a hired girl for families who'd treated her like furniture. She'd been proposed to twice more after the first engagement, once by a widower with 6 children who wanted a servant more than a wife, once by a man 40 years her senior who'd made it clear he expected certain favors before any wedding. She'd said no both times. The town had called her proud, called her difficult, called her worse things when she'd started speaking up at church meetings, questioning why the donation money meant for the poor kept ending up in Reverend Michael's new house, his new carriage, his wife's new dresses. The final straw had been 3 weeks ago. She'd confronted him directly after a sermon about charity and sacrifice, asked him in front of everyone how he could preach about giving when he took more than he gave. He'd called her a Jezebel, a troublemaker, a woman who didn't know her place. The congregation had agreed. By the end of the week, she'd been shut out of everything. No work, no credit, no friends willing to risk association. So yes, she'd been pushed, but she was done being pushed. Supper was beef stew, heavy on the potatoes, light on the beef. Bread that was dense and dark, probably a few days old. Coffee strong enough to strip paint. They ate in silence. Caleb didn't look at her, didn't speak. Just ate steadily, methodically, like it was another task to complete. When he finished, he stood, took his plate to the kitchen, washed it in a basin, and set it to dry. "You'll do the washing up from now on," he said. "I'll show you the work tomorrow. Be ready at dawn." He walked to the door, grabbed a heavy coat from a hook, and went outside without another word. Eliza finished her stew. It was better than she'd expected, actually, and gathered the dishes. The basin was already half full of water, probably from when he'd washed his own plate. She heated more water on the stove, added it, and scrubbed everything clean with a rag and a bit of harsh soap. Through the window, she could see lantern light in the barn. He was out there doing whatever it was ranchers did after dark. Checking animals, probably, making sure everything was secure for the night. She dried the dishes, put them away where she'd seen him take them from, and went to her room. The shutters opened with some effort, hinges stiff from disuse, and let in the last gray light of dusk. She could see the barn from here, the corrals, a stretch of open land beyond that faded into darkness. No neighbors, no town lights in the distance, just land and sky and silence. She pulled her spare dress from the bag, shook it out, hung it on the nail, took out her other possessions, a comb missing 3 teeth, a small mirror with a crack across one corner, a book of poetry she'd bought years ago and read so many times the pages were soft as cloth, a tin box containing her mother's wedding ring and a lock of her father's hair. That was it. Everything she owned. She lay down on the bed frame using her folded coat as a pillow. The springs creaked under her weight. Through the window, stars were starting to appear, more stars than she'd ever seen in town, where lanterns and street lamps dulled the night sky. She was so tired her bones ached, but her mind wouldn't quiet. Don't expect soft treatment, he'd written. She hadn't. But there was something in his silence, in the way he looked at her like she was already a disappointment, that made her want to prove him wrong with an intensity that surprised her. Maybe that was pride, the thing the town had always accused her of. Or maybe it was just the last bit of fight she had left. Dawn came cold and blue, light creeping through the window in shades of gray before the sun cleared the horizon. Eliza woke to the sound of boots on the porch, the creak of the door, the clatter of the stove being stoked. She dressed quickly, her work dress, the one with patches on the elbows and a hem she'd let out twice, and splashed water on her face from the basin Caleb had left outside her door sometime in the night. When she came out, he was already at the table with coffee and cornbread. He nodded to a second cup he'd poured and set across from him. "Eat," he said. "Then we'll start." The coffee was the same as last night, strong enough to wake the dead. The cornbread was plain but filling. He ate fast, and she matched his pace. "You know anything about cattle?" he asked when they'd finished. "No." "Horses?" "A little. I can ride if the horse is gentle." "None of mine are gentle. Chickens?" "I've kept chickens." "Good. That's yours then." "Feeding, eggs, keeping them alive. I've got 30, give or take. Hawks and foxes get some. You lose more than one a week, we'll talk." She nodded. "You'll also handle the garden. It's not much, too dry for most crops, but we've got beans, squash, some herbs, water it every other day from the well, more if it's hot. Weeds come up, you pull them." "All right." "House cleaning, laundry, mending, cooking." He stood, carried his plate to the basin. "I don't expect fancy. I expect edible and on time." "Understood." He grabbed his hat from the hook by the door. "Come on, I'll show you the rest." The ranch was bigger than it looked from the road. 200 acres, he told her, most of it grazing land for the 100 head of cattle he ran. The barn housed 6 horses, 4 working animals, 2 he was training to sell. There were 3 outbuildings, one for feed and tack, one for tools and equipment, one that was half workshop, half storage for things he hadn't found another place for yet. The chicken coop was on the east side of the house, a sturdy structure with nesting boxes and a fenced run. The birds were fat and healthy, clucking softly as Caleb opened the door and scattered feed from a bucket. "Twice a day," he said. "Morning and evening. Collect eggs in the morning. Watch for broody hens. They'll peck you if you're not careful." The garden was behind the house, a plot maybe 30 by 40, surrounded by a fence to keep out rabbits. Beans climbed stakes in uneven rows. Squash sprawled across one corner. Herbs, sage, thyme, something else she didn't recognize, grew in a patch near the gate. "Well's there," Caleb said, pointing to a stone structure with a wooden cover and a rope and bucket system. "You'll haul water for the house, the garden, and the animals in the barn. Trough outside refills from the creek when it's running. Right now it's not, so you'll fill that too." "How much water?" "As much as it takes." He showed her the washroom next, a lean-to with a copper tub, a scrub board, a wringer, and lines for hanging clothes. "Washings once a week, unless something gets too dirty to wait. I don't care what day, just get it done." By the time they'd circled back to the house, the sun was full up and the air was starting to warm. Eliza's head was spinning with information, but she kept her face neutral, her voice steady. "Anything else?" she asked. Caleb looked at her for a long moment, like he was trying to decide something. You ever use a gun? No? You're going to learn. He turned toward the barn. Wait here. He came back with a rifle, lever action, well-maintained, and a box of ammunition. Set them both on the porch rail. Coyotes come around sometimes. Foxes. Once in a while, something bigger. You see something threatening the animals? You shoot it. You see a person who's not supposed to be here? You come get me. Don't shoot people unless I tell you to. Are people likely to be a problem? His expression didn't change. You ran from something. Sometimes what you run from follows. It wasn't a question, so she didn't answer it. He picked up the rifle, showed her how to load it, how to aim, how to fire. Made her practice the motions without ammunition until her hands moved smoothly. Then he set up a target, a plank with a knot in the center, about 50 feet from the porch. Try it, he said, handing her the loaded rifle. The first shot went wide, kicking up dust 10 feet to the left of the target. The recoil surprised her, nearly knocked her back. Brace yourself, Caleb said. Lean into it, don't fight the weight. The second shot hit the plank, at least. Not anywhere near the knot, but it hit. Better. Again. She fired 6 more rounds. 2 hit the plank. The rest scattered around it like she was trying to outline it in bullet holes. You'll practice, Caleb said, taking the rifle back. Every day until you can hit what you're aiming at. And if I can't? Then you'll keep practicing. The first week nearly broke her. Not the work itself, though that was brutal enough. Hauling water from the well in buckets that weighed 30 pounds each, full. Carrying feed to the chickens, to the horses, to the cattle in the far pasture. Scrubbing floors on her hands and knees. Washing clothes until her knuckles were raw. Pulling weeds in the garden under a sun that felt like it was trying to burn her into the ground. No, what nearly broke her was the silence. Caleb didn't talk. Not during meals, not during work, not in the evenings when they were both back in the house. He gave instructions when necessary, terse, clipped, no wasted words, and otherwise acted like she wasn't there. At first she thought he was testing her, seeing if she'd crack, if she'd complain, if she'd demand conversation or kindness or any sign that she was more than just another piece of equipment he'd acquired. She didn't crack, but it wore on her. The quiet. The endless hours of work with nothing but her own thoughts for company. She started talking to the chickens while she fed them, narrating her tasks aloud just to hear a human voice, even if it was her own. On the 8th day, while she was hanging laundry, Caleb walked past and said without stopping, You talk to yourself a lot. Only when there's no one else to talk to, she replied. He paused, turned back. You need conversation. Go to town. I'm not welcome in town. Then I guess you'll get used to quiet. He walked away. That night, after supper, he surprised her by pulling a wooden crate from under his bed and setting it on the table. Inside were books, a dozen, maybe more, worn, mismatched, some with covers half torn off. You read? He asked. Yes. You can borrow these, long as you don't wreck them. She looked through the crate. Adventure novels mostly, a few histories. One collection of Shakespeare plays with notes scribbled in the margins. Thank you, she said. He shrugged. Gets boring out here. It was the closest thing to kindness he'd shown her. Knit. The 10th day, 3 men came. Eliza was in the garden, pulling weeds from around the bean plants, when she heard horses. She straightened, shading her eyes against the midday sun, and saw them coming up the road. 3 riders, moving at an easy pace, too deliberate to be passing through. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked toward the house. Caleb was in the barn. She could hear him working, the rhythmic sound of a hammer on metal. The riders stopped in front of the porch. All 3 dismounted, tied their horses to the rail. The one in front was older, maybe 50, with a thick gray beard and a belly that suggested he didn't miss many meals. Expensive hat, expensive boots, the kind of man who expected people to move when he walked into a room. Help you? Eliza asked, keeping her distance. The man looked her up and down, slow and obvious. Smiled, but it wasn't friendly. Well now, he said. Eliza Hart. Heard you'd ended up out here. Didn't believe it till now. She didn't recognize him. Didn't like the way he said her name, like he had a right to it. Do I know you? She asked. Name's Porter, Gerald Porter. I own the land office in town. Also sit on the county council. He hooked his thumbs in his belt. These are my associates, Mr. Brennan and Mr. Cruz. The other two men, younger, harder looking, didn't introduce themselves. Just stood there, watching her with expressions that made her skin crawl. What do you want? Eliza asked. Porter's smile widened. Just checking in, making sure you're settling in all right. Vance treating you well? That's none of your business. Now see, that's where you're wrong. When a woman of questionable reputation shows up at a respectable man's ranch, that becomes the community's business. We have standards to maintain. Eliza felt heat rise in her chest. Questionable reputation? I worked hard my whole life, paid my debts. The only thing I'm guilty of is speaking truth when powerful men wanted silence. Truth? Porter laughed. You slandered a man of standing, made wild accusations with no proof. That's not truth, girl. That's hysteria. I had proof. Records showing you had nothing but a troublesome mouth and an inflated sense of your own importance. He stepped closer. Now you've brought that trouble here. Vance might not know what he's taken in yet, but we're doing him the courtesy of informing him. Informing him of what? A new voice said. All of them turned. Caleb stood 10 feet away, hammer still in his hand. His expression was flat, unreadable, but something in his posture, the way he stood, the angle of his shoulders, made the air feel suddenly thinner. Porter recovered quickly. Caleb, good to see you. I heard what you were doing. Caleb's eyes moved from Porter to the other two men, then back. You've done it. Now leave. Now hold on. We came all the way out here as a courtesy, to warn you that I don't need warnings. I need you off my land. Porter's smile faded. You're making a mistake protecting her. She's trouble, proven trouble. That's my problem, not yours. It'll become your problem when the town decides they don't want to do business with someone who harbors. Caleb moved. Not fast, not aggressive, just shifted his weight and lifted the hammer slightly, still holding it loose at his side. I said leave, he repeated, quieter this time. Porter stared at him. The two younger men had their hands near their belts, not quite reaching for weapons, but close. The tension stretched, pulled tight. Then Porter stepped back. Fine, but you'll regret this, Vance. Mark my words. He climbed onto his horse, the other two following. They turned and rode back down the road, not hurrying but not lingering either. Caleb watched until they were out of sight. Then he turned to Eliza. Inside, he said. Now. She followed him into the house. He set the hammer on the table, poured himself coffee from the pot on the stove, and leaned against the counter. Tell me, he said. All of it. So she did. She told him about Reverend Michaels, about the donation records she'd found in the church office while helping organize a charity drive, about the discrepancies, money that came in but never went out, except to pay for things the Reverend claimed were necessary expenses. His house, his carriage, trips he took to the city, supposedly for church business. She told him how she'd brought it to the council first, privately, how they dismissed her, how she'd brought it to the congregation publicly, how the Reverend had turned it around, made her the villain, the bitter woman with a grudge against the righteous. And they believed him, Caleb said. Every single one of them. He was quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee. Porter and those men, they'll be back. I know. They'll try to force me to send you away, threaten business deals, taxes, supplies, make it expensive for me to keep you here. I know that too. So why'd you come here, if you knew it would follow you? She met his eyes. Because I had nowhere else to go. And because I'm tired of running from the truth. He considered that, set his cup down. All right? All right? All right, you can stay, long as you work, long as you pull your weight. What about when they come back? Let me worry about that. It wasn't a promise, wasn't even reassurance, really, but it was something. They came back 6 days later. Not Porter this time, someone else. A man in a suit with papers in his hand, accompanied by the county sheriff. A lean, weathered man named Harding who'd been in the job for 20 years and looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Eliza was hanging laundry when they arrived. Caleb was working with one of the horses in the corral, training it to accept a saddle. The suited man stopped at the fence. Mr. Vance? My name is Thomas Whitaker. I'm an attorney representing the county council. Caleb kept working. Good for you. I have a legal order requiring you to release Miss Eliza Hart into custody. That got his attention. He turned, looked at Whitaker, then at the sheriff. On what grounds? Whitaker held up the papers. Miss Hart is wanted for questioning regarding charges of defamation, theft of church property, and disturbing the peace. The council has authorized her temporary detention until the matter can be resolved in court. She didn't steal anything, Caleb said, and the rest is nonsense. That's for the court to decide. If you refuse to comply, Sheriff Harding is authorized to enforce the order. Harding looked uncomfortable. Caleb, I don't want trouble. Just let her come in voluntarily, answer some questions, and this'll all get sorted. Eliza stepped forward. What happens if I go with you? You'll be held in town until the hearing, Whitaker said. Probably a few days. And if I refuse, then you'll be taken by force. Caleb moved between Eliza and the two men. She's not going anywhere. Mr. Vance, she works for me, lives on my property. You want to take her? You'll need more than a paper and a tired sheriff. Harding sighed. Caleb, don't do this. I've got deputies back in town. I can bring them out here if I have to. You do that, Caleb said. Bring all the deputies you want. You'll still need to go through me. Whitaker's expression hardened. You're obstructing justice. I'm protecting someone who's done nothing wrong. The law says otherwise. The law is being used by men who want her silenced. That's not justice. For a moment, no one moved. Then Whitaker folded the papers, put them back in his coat. You have until tomorrow noon to comply. After that, we'll return with additional personnel and enforce this order by any means necessary. He and Harding climbed back onto their horses and left. Caleb stood there, watching them go, his jaw tight. You shouldn't have done that, Eliza said quietly. Probably not. They'll come back with more men. They'll make this worse for you. Probably. Why? Why are you doing this? He turned to look at her. Because they're wrong, and I'm tired of watching wrong win. It was the most he'd said to her in one go since she'd arrived. What do we do? She asked. We get ready. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Caleb brought out a second rifle, an old one he'd kept wrapped in oilcloth in the barn, taught Eliza how to load it faster, how to sight properly, how to breathe through the shot, made her practice until her shoulder ached from the recoil. He checked his ammunition, secured the barn, the chicken coop, the corral, brought the horses in close where he could watch them. They might try to burn something, he said, scare us out, so we keep everything locked down. And if they don't scare, then we hold. Against how many? As many as come. Eliza watched him work, methodical, calm, like he'd done this before. You've fought before, she said. Haven't you? He paused. Long time ago. War? Something like that. He didn't elaborate, and she didn't push. That night they sat at the table with the lamps turned low. Caleb cleaned his rifle. Eliza read or tried to, but the words kept blurring together. You're scared, Caleb said. Of course I'm scared. They're going to come with guns. Probably. And you're willing to risk getting shot over someone you barely know. He looked up from the rifle. I know you work hard. I know you don't complain. I know you were brave enough to stand up to powerful men when no one else would. That's enough. Enough for what? Enough to be worth standing beside. Something shifted in her chest. Not quite trust, too soon for that, but something close. Recognition, maybe, of shared defiance, shared stubbornness. Thank you, she said. He went back to cleaning the rifle. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be long. But neither of them slept much. They came at noon, just like Whitaker promised. 8 men, Sheriff Harding in front looking grim, Whitaker beside him with the papers. Behind them, 6 deputies, some wearing badges, some not, all armed. Caleb stood on the porch, rifle in hand but pointed at the ground. Eliza stood beside him, her own rifle held the same way. This is your last chance, Vance, Harding called out, and send the woman out and there's no trouble. Can't do that, Sheriff. Then I'm legally obligated to remove her by force. You're legally obligated to serve corrupt men. That's different. Whitaker leaned forward in his saddle. Mr. Vance, I understand you feel protective, But this is a matter of law, not personal feeling. If you continue to resist, you'll be arrested along with Miss Hart. For what crime? Obstruction. Aiding a fugitive. Take your pick. Eliza stepped forward. I'll go. No, Caleb said, not looking at her. They'll hurt you if I don't. They'll try. One of the deputies, a young man with a patchy beard, shifted in his saddle, hand moving toward his gun. Harding saw it, held up a hand. Nobody's shooting anybody, the sheriff said firmly. Vance, be reasonable. This doesn't have to end badly. Then leave, Caleb said, and it won't. Whitaker made an impatient sound. Sheriff, we've given him every opportunity. Enforce the order. Harding looked at Caleb for a long moment. Then he sighed and dismounted. All right, but Vance, you fire that rifle, my men fire back. You understand? I understand. Harding started walking toward the porch. The deputies fanned out behind him, hands on their weapons. Caleb raised his rifle, not pointing it at anyone, just bringing it up across his chest. That's close enough. Harding stopped 20 feet away. I don't want to do this, Caleb. I've known you 10 years. You're a good man. But if you don't step aside, I will have my men remove you. Then you'll have a fight. Against 8 armed men? That's suicide. Maybe, but you'll lose some men before it's over. You willing to pay that price for a corrupt council? Harding's face tightened. It's not about corruption. It's about the law. The law is supposed to protect people, not persecute them. That's for the court to decide. The court is run by the same men who want her silenced. They stared at each other. The moment stretched, taut as wire. Then Eliza did something neither of them expected. She stepped off the porch, set her rifle against the rail, and walked toward Harding with her hands raised. Eliza, Caleb started. I'll go, she said. But I want to say something first. Harding looked wary. Say it quick. She turned to face the deputies, to face Whitaker, to face all of them. Raised her voice so it carried. You think you're enforcing the law, but you're not. You're enforcing the will of men who stole from people who trusted them. People who gave what little they had because they believed it would help those in need. And instead, it paid for carriages and houses and trips to the city. That's slander, Whitaker said sharply. It's truth, and I can prove it. She looked at Harding. The records are still in the church office. Donation ledgers, expense receipts, everything. I didn't steal them. I just read them. Anyone can. If you actually cared about justice instead of protecting powerful men, you'd look for yourself. Harding shifted uncomfortably. But you won't, Eliza continued. Because it's easier to silence one woman than challenge the whole system. Easier to call me a liar than admit you've been serving liars. Enough, Whitaker said. He looked at Harding. Take her, now. Harding hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. You heard the man, one of the deputies said, dismounting. Let's go. He reached for Eliza's arm. Caleb's rifle came up, pointed directly at the deputy. Touch her and I'll drop you. Every gun in the yard suddenly pointed at Caleb. Don't! Eliza shouted. Time froze. 8 guns aimed at one man aiming back, and Eliza standing in the middle, unarmed. This is insane, Harding said, voice strained. Caleb, lower the rifle. Not until you leave. I can't leave. I have an order. Then we have a problem. The deputy who'd reached for Eliza took a step back, hands raised. Easy, Vance, easy. Whitaker's voice cut through the tension. Sheriff, your duty is clear. If Mr. Vance will not comply, you are authorized to use force. That is the law. Harding looked torn, looked at Caleb, at Eliza, at his deputies. The law, Caleb said quietly, is supposed to be just. When it's not, men have a duty to resist. That's not your call to make. Then whose is it? Yours? His? Caleb nodded toward Whitaker. Or the men who paid him to bring that paper? Harding's jaw worked. He looked down at the ground, then back up. Stand down, he said. Sheriff, Whitaker started. I said stand down. Harding looked at his deputies. Lower your weapons. You can't be serious, Whitaker said. This is dereliction of this, Harding said, turning on him. is me deciding that I'm not starting a gunfight on a man's property over a charge that smells like rotten politics. You want her arrested? Get a judge who's not in Porter's pocket to sign the order. Until then, I'm done. He walked back to his horse, mounted. His deputies, looking confused, followed suit. Whitaker sat frozen in his saddle, face red. You'll regret this, Sheriff. I'll see you removed from office. Maybe, Harding said, but I'll still be able to sleep at night. He looked at Caleb. You're not out of this, Vance. They'll find another way. I know. And next time I might not have a choice. I know that too. Harding nodded once, then turned his horse and rode away. The deputies followed. Whitaker stayed a moment longer, glaring. This isn't over, he said. Never thought it was, Caleb replied. The lawyer rode off. Silence fell over the ranch. Caleb lowered his rifle, set it against the porch rail. His hands were shaking, just slightly, but Eliza saw it. You all right? She asked. No. He sat down hard on the porch steps. That was the stupidest thing I've ever done. You stood up for me. I nearly got us both killed. But you didn't. He looked up at her. They'll be back. With a real order this time. Maybe federal marshals. And next time I won't be able to bluff them off. Eliza sat down beside him. Then we'll figure something else out. Like what? She didn't have an answer. They sat there as the sun climbed higher, as the adrenaline faded and left them both exhausted, as the weight of what was coming settled over them like a heavy blanket. Finally, Caleb spoke. There might be one way. What? He turned to look at her. It's drastic, and you'd have to agree to it. Tell me. He took a breath. We could get married. Eliza stared at him. What? Legally, a husband has authority over his wife's affairs. If you're married to me, they can't take you without my consent. It's not foolproof, but it would make things a hell of a lot more complicated for them. You're serious? I don't joke. She stood, paced a few steps, turned back. You barely know me. You don't even like me. I don't have to like you to recognize that you deserve better than what they're trying to do to you. This is insane. So is pointing a rifle at 8 armed men. But we did that too. Eliza pressed her hands to her face, trying to think. Marriage. To a man she'd known less than 3 weeks. A man who barely spoke to her, who worked her like a mule, who'd shown her exactly one act of kindness and now wanted to bind their lives together legally. And yet, what was the alternative? Go to town and face a rigged trial? Run again and keep running for the rest of her life? If we did this, she said slowly, it would be in name only. A legal arrangement, nothing more. Agreed. You'd expect nothing from me beyond the work I'm already doing. Correct. And if someday you change your mind, if you decide you actually want a real wife, we'd find a way to end it, legally. He nodded. If that's what you want. She looked at him, this hard, silent man who'd stepped between her and destruction twice now, who'd risked his life, his home, his safety for a woman he owed nothing to. Why? She asked. Why would you do this? He was quiet for a long moment. Then, my wife died 6 years ago. Fever took her in 3 days. Before that, we were happy. We had plans. We were going to expand the ranch, maybe start a family. And then she was gone, and I realized how fragile everything is, how fast it can all disappear. He looked out at the land. I've spent 6 years keeping to myself, not making connections, not taking risks, just existing. And then you showed up, and those men came after you, and I remembered what it felt like to believe something mattered more than just getting through the day. He turned back to her. So maybe I'm doing this for you, or maybe I'm doing it for me. Either way, if you're willing, I think we both get something out of it. Eliza stood there, the sun hot on her shoulders, the wind tugging at her dress. Everything in her life had been taken, piece by piece, until she was left with nothing but her stubbornness and her pride. And now this man, this strange, damaged, infuriatingly silent man, was offering her a way to fight back. All right, she said. All right? Yes. I'll marry you. He stood, held out his hand. Then we'd better go to town before they come back. She took his hand. His palm was calloused, rough, warm, and together They walked toward whatever came next. The ride to town took 2 hours, and they didn't speak for most of it. Caleb drove the wagon, hands steady on the reins, eyes fixed on the road ahead. Eliza sat beside him, her best dress smoothed over her knees, her hair pinned up as neatly as she could manage without a proper mirror. She'd tried 3 times before getting it right, her fingers clumsy with nerves. Getting married. To a man she'd known less than a month. A man whose first name she'd only learned a week ago when she'd asked him directly, and he'd answered like it was a chore. The landscape rolled past, endless brown earth, scattered brush, the occasional stand of cottonwoods marking where water ran underground. The sky stretched wide and pale, clouds building in the west but not close enough to matter yet. "There's a justice of the peace in town," Caleb said finally, breaking the silence. "Name's Harlan. He's fair. Doesn't ask too many questions. Will he marry us without posting bans? For the right price, he'll marry us today." Eliza glanced at him. "You have that kind of money?" "I've got enough." She wanted to ask more. About his wife. About the years he'd spent alone. About what had made him into someone who could offer marriage to a stranger as casually as offering a cup of coffee. But his jaw was set tight, his shoulders tense, and she recognized the body language of a man who'd reached his limit for talking. So she stayed quiet and watched the road. Town appeared on the horizon around mid-morning, a collection of wooden buildings clustered along a main street, church steeple rising above the rest like a finger pointing at judgment. Eliza felt her stomach tighten as they got closer. She hadn't been here since arriving weeks ago, and she'd been grateful for the distance. Now riding back in, she felt exposed, visible. People turned to look as the wagon rolled down the main street. A woman carrying a basket stopped mid-step, staring. 2 men outside the general store nudged each other, pointed. Word would spread fast. Eliza Hart, back in town, with Caleb Vance, together. Let them talk. Caleb pulled the wagon up in front of a small office with a sign that read, H. Harlan, Justice of the Peace, Notary Public. He set the brake, climbed down, and came around to help Eliza. She took his hand, rough, warm, steady, and stepped down onto the dusty street. "You sure about this?" he asked quietly. "Are you?" "I asked first." She looked up at him. His face was impossible to read, as always, but there was something in his eyes, not quite fear, but close. Doubt, maybe. The same doubt she felt churning in her own chest. "I'm sure," she said. He nodded once. "All right then." They walked into the office together. Harlan was a small man with wire-rimmed spectacles and ink-stained fingers. He looked up from his desk, squinting at them over the rims of his glasses. "Caleb Vance," he said, surprised. "Been a long time." "Has," Caleb agreed. "We need to get married. Today." Harlan blinked, looked at Eliza, back at Caleb. "Today? As in right now? That a problem?" "Well, no, but there's paperwork, and usually people plan these things." "We've planned," Caleb said. "Can you do it or not?" Harlan leaned back in his chair, studying them both. "There a reason for the rush? Does there need to be one?" "No, I suppose not." Harlan stood, walked to a filing cabinet, and pulled out a form. "I'll need some information from both of you. Names, ages, previous marriages, if any." They gave him what he needed. Harlan wrote it all down in careful script, asking questions in a dry, methodical voice. Had either of them been married before? Was Caleb widowed? How long? Did they understand that marriage was a legal contract? Did they enter into it willingly? Yes to everything. "I'll need 2 witnesses," Harlan said. "You bring anyone?" Caleb shook his head. "I can fetch someone from the street if needed. Won't take long." He went to the door, looked out, and called to a man passing by. "Tom, you got a minute?" The man, weathered, 60 or so, with a limp, came inside. Harlan explained the situation. Tom looked at them curiously but shrugged. "Sure, I'll witness. Not every day you see Vance getting hitched." Harlan went back out and returned with a woman this time, middle-aged, carrying a basket of vegetables. She agreed just as easily, though she gave Eliza a long measuring look that made Eliza want to squirm. "All right," Harlan said, positioning himself behind his desk. "Let's make this official." The ceremony was brief. Harlan read from a small book, his voice flat and uninflected. Did Caleb take Eliza to be his lawfully wedded wife? He did. Did Eliza take Caleb to be her lawfully wedded husband? She did. By the power vested in him, he now pronounced them man and wife. No kiss, no music, no celebration. Just signatures on a piece of paper and two strangers who nodded their thanks and left. Tom clapped Caleb on the shoulder as they walked out. Congratulations, I suppose. Didn't think I'd see you married again. Neither did I, Caleb said. The woman with the vegetables stopped Eliza on the steps. You're the one who caused all that trouble at the church, aren't you? Eliza felt her spine straighten. I told the truth. If that caused trouble, that's not on me. The woman sniffed. Truth or not, you made enemies. Watch yourself, girl. Vance can't protect you from everything. She walked away before Eliza could respond. Back in the wagon, Caleb took the reins and started the horses moving. They'd made it half a block when a voice called out, Vance, hold up! Sheriff Harding stepped into the street, hand raised. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop. Heard you were in town, Harding said, walking over. His eyes moved from Caleb to Eliza and back. What's going on? Got married, Caleb said simply. Harding's eyebrows shot up. You what? This morning, about 15 minutes ago. The sheriff stared at them. You're telling me you married Eliza Hart. That's what I'm telling you. Because you wanted to, or because... He stopped, understanding flooding his face. You're trying to protect her, legally. I'm married to her. That's all that matters. Harding rubbed his face with one hand. Caleb, this doesn't change anything. They can still bring charges against her. But they can't take her without my consent, not easily. They'll find a way. Let them try. Harding looked at Eliza. You know what you've gotten yourself into? I know, she said quietly. And you're willing to live with it? Whatever comes? I am. The sheriff shook his head slowly. You're both crazy. He stepped back from the wagon. But it's done now, I suppose. Congratulations or condolences, whichever fits better. He walked away, leaving them in the street. Caleb didn't say anything, just urged the horses forward and headed out of town. They were a mile down the road when Eliza finally spoke. Do you think it'll work? Honestly, I don't know. But you did it anyway. Yes. Why? He was quiet for a long moment. The wagon creaked, the horses' hooves clopped steady on the hard-packed dirt. Finally, he said, because doing nothing felt worse. It wasn't a romantic answer, wasn't even a particularly hopeful one, but it was honest, and Eliza found she appreciated that more than any pretty lie. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet. We haven't seen the worst of it. He was right about that. They were 2 miles from the ranch when they saw the smoke. Thick, black, rising in a column that stained the pale sky. Caleb saw it first, went rigid in the seat. Then he snapped the reins hard, driving the horses faster. What is it? Eliza asked, though she already knew. Her heart was hammering. The ranch, Caleb said, voice tight. They burned something. The wagon jolted over ruts, wheels bouncing hard enough to rattle Eliza's teeth. She gripped the seat, watching the smoke grow thicker as they got closer. Please not the house, she thought. Please not the barn. But it was worse. When they came over the rise and saw the ranch spread out below them, the chicken coop was engulfed in flames. Orange and red licking up the sides, black smoke pouring from the roof. The structure was nearly gone already, collapsing in on itself in a shower of sparks. Caleb didn't slow down. He drove straight into the yard, pulled the horses to a stop, and jumped down before the wagon had fully settled. Eliza scrambled after him. The heat hit her like a wall. The coop crackled and roared, burning so hot she could feel it from 20 feet away. She could hear the chickens inside, the ones that were still alive, screaming. Caleb ran toward the barn, came back with 2 buckets. The well, he shouted. Fill them and bring them here. Eliza ran. Her skirts tangled around her legs and she nearly fell, caught herself, kept going. The well was on the other side of the house. She grabbed the rope, hauled up the bucket, dumped it into one of the containers Caleb had shoved at her. Did it again. Her arms burned. She didn't care. She carried both buckets back to the fire, sloshing water with every step. Caleb took one, threw it at the base of the flames. The water hissed, turned to steam, did almost nothing. Again, he yelled. They worked like that for 20 minutes, hauling water, throwing it, watching it evaporate against the inferno. The coop was too far gone. Nothing they did made a difference. But they kept trying anyway, desperate and stupid, and refusing to stop. Finally, the roof collapsed completely. The walls followed, crashing inward in an explosion of embers. Caleb stepped back, chest heaving, face black with soot. "It's gone," he said. Eliza set down the bucket she'd been carrying. Her arms shook. Her dress was soaked, her hair falling out of its pins. The chickens, dead. All of them. She looked at the burning wreckage, felt something hot and angry rise in her throat. They did this. Porter and his men. Probably. We should what? Caleb turned on her, eyes blazing. Ride back to town and accuse them? With what proof? You think the sheriff will arrest them based on our word? So we do nothing? We do what we can, which is make sure the fire doesn't spread and rebuild what we lost. His voice was hard, controlled, but she could hear the fury underneath. That's how they win, Eliza. They make us react. They make us stupid. We're not giving them that. She wanted to argue, wanted to scream, to break something, to ride into town herself and put a bullet through Porter's window. But Caleb was right. That's exactly what they'd want. Evidence of violence they could use against them. So she swallowed the rage and nodded. They spent the next hour making sure the fire didn't jump to the other buildings, soaked the ground around the barn, watered down the side of the house closest to the coop, watched the flames die down to coals, then ash. When it was finally over, Caleb stood looking at the blackened remains. 30 chickens, he said quietly, plus the coop. That's 3 months' worth of eggs, money we needed. I'm sorry, Eliza said. Not your fault. Isn't it? They did this because of me. He looked at her. They did this because they're bastards who burn things when they don't get their way. That's on them, not you. But she didn't believe him, and she could tell from his face that he didn't fully believe it either. They walked back to the house. Eliza pumped water at the sink, washed the soot from her hands and face. Caleb did the same, methodical and silent. We need to eat, he said finally. And then we need to figure out what comes next. What is there to figure out? They'll keep coming until we break or leave. Or until we make them stop. How do we do that? He didn't answer. Just went to the stove and started heating beans from a jar, slicing bread with hands that were steadier than they should have been. Eliza set the table, moving by habit because thinking hurt too much. They ate in silence. The beans tasted like ash in her mouth, but she forced them down anyway. Waste was a sin out here, even when your world was burning down around you. After, Caleb pushed back from the table. There's a man in the next county. Name's Judge Whitmore. He's not in Porter's pocket. Retired now, but he still has connections. If we can get to him, explain what's happening, he might be able to help. Might? It's the best we've got, Eliza considered. How far? 2 days' ride, maybe 3 if the weather turns. And what do we do about the ranch while we're gone? Lock it down best we can. Hope they don't burn the rest of it. It was a terrible plan. Risky, uncertain, dependent on a stranger's willingness to help. But it was something, action instead of waiting. When do we leave? She asked. Tomorrow morning. Early. That night, Eliza lay in her small room. Her room, even though, technically, now she was Caleb's wife and could probably claim the bigger bedroom if she wanted, and stared at the ceiling. Her body ached from hauling water. Her throat hurt from breathing smoke. Her mind wouldn't stop replaying the sound of the chickens dying. She'd cost Caleb so much already. Money, safety, peace. And for what? So she could avoid facing consequences for speaking truth? No, that wasn't fair. She hadn't asked for this. Hadn't asked for corrupt men to come after her. Hadn't asked to be driven from her home. She'd only asked to be heard, to be believed. Was that so wrong? A knock on the doorframe. She sat up. Caleb stood there, lantern in hand. Can't sleep either? He asked. No. He came in, set the lantern on the shelf. The light threw his shadow huge against the wall. I've been thinking. About why I'm doing this. Really doing it. He sat down on the edge of the bed frame, the one that still didn't have a mattress. She was still sleeping on blankets she'd layered on the springs. I told you it was because it felt like the right thing. That's true. But it's not all of it. Eliza waited. When my wife died, he continued, voice low, I shut down. Stopped talking to people. Stopped going to town except when I had to. Stopped caring about anything except getting through the day. It was easier that way, safer. He looked down at his hands, but it was also dying, just slower. And then I showed up. And then you showed up. And suddenly I had to make choices again, had to decide what I stood for, whether I was going to keep hiding or start living. He met her eyes. So maybe I'm not doing this for you. Maybe I'm doing it for me, because you reminded me what it feels like to give a damn. Eliza didn't know what to say to that, so she just reached out and put her hand over his. He looked at it, surprised maybe, but didn't pull away. We're in this together now, she said. Whatever happens. Together, he repeated, like he was testing the word. Then he nodded. Yeah, together. He stood, picked up the lantern. Get some sleep if you can. We've got a long ride ahead. After he left, Eliza lay back down, and somehow, despite everything, she did sleep. Not well, but enough. They left before dawn, the sky still dark and cold. Caleb had packed supplies, food, water, ammunition, blankets. 2 horses saddled and ready. He'd locked the house, the barn, everything that could be locked. It wouldn't stop determined men, but it might slow them down. The ride was hard from the start. Caleb set a brutal pace, pushing the horses as fast as they could safely go over rough terrain. They stopped twice to rest the animals and eat cold food from their packs, but never for long. Eliza's thighs screamed from the saddle. She wasn't used to riding this much, this hard. But she didn't complain, just gritted her teeth and kept up. By the time the sun was high, they'd put 20 miles between them and the ranch. The landscape had changed, more trees now, actual green instead of just brown and gray. A river ran somewhere nearby. She could hear it. We'll stop here, Caleb said, pulling his horse to a halt near a stand of cottonwoods. Rest for an hour, then push on. They dismounted. Eliza's legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground. She caught herself on the saddle, waited for the world to stop spinning. Caleb noticed. You all right? Fine. Just not used to it. We can slow down if you need. No, we keep going. He looked at her for a moment, then nodded. Stubborn. You say that like it's a bad thing. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's the only thing that matters. They sat in the shade of the trees, eating jerky and hard bread. The horses cropped grass nearby, tails swishing at flies. It was almost peaceful, almost easy to forget they were running from something. Tell me about your wife, Eliza said. Caleb went still. Why? Because we're married now, and I don't know anything about you except you're quiet, and you work hard, and you're willing to fight men with guns for a stranger. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, Her name was Sarah. We met at a dance in town, before I had the ranch, when I was just working for wages and trying to save money. She was the daughter of a shopkeeper, smart, funny, had a laugh that made you want to laugh with her. How long were you married? 4 years, good years, hard, but good. He looked out at the river. She wanted children. We tried. Never happened. I told her it didn't matter. We had time. And then we didn't. I'm sorry. Me too. He stood, brushed crumbs from his pants. Come on. We should keep moving. They rode until dusk, the light fading from gold to purple to black. Caleb found a spot to camp, a clearing with a rock face on one side, open ground on the other. Defensible, he said, in case they had company. Eliza didn't ask what kind of company he meant. She already knew. They made a small fire, cooked beans and coffee, ate in silence, watching the darkness gather. Stars came out, brighter than Eliza had ever seen them. The air smelled like pine and wood smoke. I'll take first watch, Caleb said when they'd finished eating. You sleep. Watch for what? Anyone following us? Anyone who shouldn't be here. She wanted to argue that she could take a turn too, that she wasn't helpless, but exhaustion had her in its teeth, dragging her down. So she just wrapped herself in a blanket and lay down near the fire. Sleep came fast, heavy and dark and dreamless. She woke to Caleb's hand on her shoulder, shaking her gently. Easy. It's just me. She sat up, disoriented. The fire had burned down to coals. The sky was starting to lighten in the east, false dawn, barely enough to see by. What's wrong? She whispered. Nothing. Your turn to watch. I need a couple hours. He lay down where she'd been, pulled his coat over himself, and was asleep in seconds. Just like that. Like he'd been trained to sleep anywhere, anytime. Maybe he had been. She still didn't know much about his past. The war he'd mentioned once and never brought up again. Eliza fed the fire carefully, adding small sticks until it flickered back to life. Then she sat with the rifle across her knees, watching the darkness. Nothing happened. No sounds except wind in the trees, the occasional call of a night bird, the soft breathing of the horses tied nearby. It should have been peaceful. Instead, it felt like waiting, like the world was holding its breath. When the sun finally rose, Caleb woke immediately. No grogginess, no slow return, just eyes open and alert, reaching for his rifle before he even sat up. Anything? He asked. Nothing. Good. He stood, stretched. We'll eat quick and ride. Should make it to Whitmore's by tonight if we push. They did push, hard. The horses were tired, starting to lag, but Caleb kept them moving. Through hills that climbed and dropped, through meadows thick with grass, through a shallow creek that soaked Eliza's boots and left them squelching. By late afternoon, they reached a town, smaller than the one they'd left, barely more than a crossroads with a general store and a church. Caleb stopped long enough to ask directions, confirm Whitmore still lived where he remembered. 2 miles north, a woman told him, eyeing them both with open curiosity. Big house at the end of the valley. Can't miss it. They found it as the sun touched the horizon. A 2-story house, white painted, with a wide porch and flower boxes under the windows. It looked too civilized for the rough country around it, like someone had transplanted a piece of the East and tried to make it grow. Caleb rode up to the porch, dismounted. Eliza followed, her legs shaking when they hit the ground. 3 days of riding had turned her muscles to jelly. A man came out before they could knock, tall, white-haired, maybe 70, with sharp blue eyes that took in everything at a glance. Help you? He asked. Judge Whitmore? Caleb said. Retired Judge Whitmore, yes. Who's asking? Name's Caleb Vance. This is my wife, Eliza. We need your help. Whitmore's eyes narrowed. With what? With men who are using the law to settle personal scores. Men who burned my property and threatened my wife because she told the truth about them. The judge looked at them both for a long moment. Then he stepped back and opened the door wider. You'd better come inside, he said. They sat in Whitmore's study, a room lined with books, smelling of leather and old paper. The judge poured them each a glass of water, then settled behind his desk. Tell me everything, he said. So they did. Eliza talked about Reverend Michaels, the stolen donations, the records she'd found, about being cast out, threatened, driven from town. Caleb talked about the harassment, the legal order, the burned chicken coop, about marrying Eliza to protect her and knowing it might not be enough. Whitmore listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. When they finished, he leaned back in his chair. You're asking me to intervene in another county's legal affairs, he said. Yes, Caleb said, based on accusations against a respected religious figure and several prominent citizens. The accusations are true. She can prove it. Can you? Whitmore looked at Eliza. Do you still have access to those records? They're in the church office. Anyone can look at them. But will anyone? If this Reverend Michaels is as connected as you say, he's probably already destroyed anything incriminating. Eliza's heart sank. She hadn't thought of that. Of course he would have. The moment she'd left town, he would have cleaned house. Then what do we do? She asked. Whitmore steepled his fingers. I can write letters. To the territorial governor, to federal marshals. I can make noise, ask questions, put pressure on the local authorities to actually investigate instead of blindly enforcing orders from corrupt men. Will it work? Maybe, maybe not. But it's a start. He looked at Caleb. You understand what you're risking. If these men are as vindictive as you say, they won't stop just because I ask questions. They'll escalate. They already burned my property, Caleb said flatly. How much worse can it get? A lot worse. They could burn your house, poison your well, hurt you directly. Men who've already crossed the line once find it easier to cross it again. Then we'll deal with it when it comes. Whitmore smiled, thin, grim. You've got spine, both of you. That's good. You'll need it. He stood. It's too late to start anything tonight. You'll stay here. There's a room upstairs you can use. In the morning, I'll start writing letters. Thank you, Eliza said. Don't thank me yet. I haven't done anything except offer you a bed. But it was more than that. It was hope. Fragile, uncertain hope that maybe the system wasn't completely broken, that maybe someone in power would actually listen. The room Whitmore gave them had a real bed, big, soft, with clean sheets and pillows. Eliza stared at it like she'd forgotten such things existed. I'll sleep on the floor, Caleb said. Don't be ridiculous. The bed's big enough for both of us. Eliza, we're married, legally, and we're both exhausted. We can share a bed without it meaning anything. He looked uncomfortable but too tired to argue. All right. They took turns washing up in the basin Whitmore's housekeeper had left, changed into the spare clothes they'd brought. Then, awkwardly, they both climbed into bed. Caleb stayed on his side, Eliza on hers, a careful foot of space between them. This is strange, Eliza said. Yes. Are you... I'm fine, go to sleep, she tried. But awareness of him beside her, his breathing, his warmth, the sheer solid presence of him, kept her awake. This man she'd married, this stranger who'd become the only person in the world she could trust. Caleb? What? Thank you for all of this. He was quiet. Then, you're welcome. Silence settled. Outside, night birds called. Inside, the house creaked and settled. And eventually, impossibly, they both slept. Morning came with the smell of coffee and bacon drifting up from downstairs. Eliza woke first, disoriented for a moment by the soft mattress, the clean sheets, the sunlight streaming through actual curtains. Then she remembered where she was and why. Caleb was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, pulling on his boots. His hair was loose, falling past his shoulders, and she realized she'd never seen it down before. It made him look younger somehow. Less hard. Sleep all right? He asked without turning. Better than I have in weeks. Good. He stood, reached for his shirt. Whitmore's already up. I heard him moving around an hour ago. They dressed quickly, both of them moving with the efficiency of people who'd learned not to waste time on morning routines. Downstairs, they found the judge at his dining table, paper spread in front of him, a pen scratching across parchment. Coffee's on the stove, he said without looking up. Help yourselves. I'm finishing the first letter. The housekeeper, a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Chen, who'd barely spoken to them last night, brought out plates of eggs and bacon and thick slices of bread still warm from the oven. Real food. Hot food. Eliza had to force herself not to eat too fast, not to embarrass herself. Whitmore finished writing, blotted the ink, and set the letter aside. That's to the territorial governor. I'm outlining the situation, requesting an independent investigation into the handling of county affairs. He picked up his coffee. It won't be fast. These things never are. But it plants a seed. And in the meantime? Caleb asked. In the meantime, you go home and you wait. You keep your heads down. You don't give them any excuse to escalate further. They burn my property. I'm supposed to just accept that? You're supposed to be smart. Fighting them directly plays into their hands. They want you to lash out, to give them justification for more extreme measures. Whitmore's eyes were sharp. I know it's hard, but patience is a weapon too. Eliza set down her fork. How long before we hear back from the governor? Weeks, maybe months. Months? Her voice came out sharper than she intended. We're supposed to just sit there for months while they do whatever they want? What's the alternative? Storm into town with guns blazing? Get yourselves killed or arrested? Whitmore leaned forward. I understand your frustration, but this is how change happens in civilized society. Slowly. Through proper channels. Civilized society didn't help me when I needed it, Eliza said. Civilized society called me a liar and drove me out. Then prove them wrong. Survive long enough for the truth to come out. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that survival wasn't enough, that she needed justice, needed vindication. But Caleb's hand found hers under the table, squeezed bulk once. A silent message. Not now. Not here. She swallowed her anger and nodded. They left after breakfast, Whitmore walking them out to their horses. "I'll send word when I hear anything," he said. "In the meantime, be careful. And if things get worse, if you're in actual danger, you come back here. Understood?" "Understood," Caleb said. They rode south, retracing their path from the day before. The journey felt longer somehow, heavier, like they were riding towards something instead of away from it. Around noon, they stopped to rest the horses at the same clearing where they'd camped. Eliza dismounted, her legs protesting every movement. 3 days in the saddle had left her sore in places she didn't know could hurt. Caleb pulled food from his pack, jerky, hard bread, cheese that was starting to sweat in the heat. They ate standing, too restless to sit. "Do you think it'll work?" Eliza asked. "Whitmore's letters?" "I think it's the best shot we've got." "That's not an answer." He looked at her. "I don't know. Maybe. Probably not. But at least we're doing something." "Feels like we're just waiting to get hit again." "Welcome to fighting people with power. They make you wait. They make you doubt. They make you desperate enough to do something stupid so they can crush you for it." He folded the cheese back into its cloth. "We're not giving them that. So we just take it, whatever they do. No, we prepare. We make ourselves harder to hurt. And we trust that eventually the truth matters. And if it doesn't," his jaw tightened, "then we figure out something else." They rode on. The afternoon stretched long and hot, the sun beating down without mercy. Eliza's canteen ran dry. Caleb shared his, but by the time they reached the next creek, they were both parched and dusty and tired enough that sitting down felt dangerous, like they might not get back up. The sun was setting when they finally saw the ranch in the distance. Eliza felt her chest tighten. 3 days ago, they'd left in a hurry, unsure if there'd be anything to come back to. Now, as the buildings came into focus, she could see the house still stood. The barn, too. The burned remains of the chicken coop were visible as a dark scar on the landscape, but nothing else looked damaged. "They didn't come back," Caleb said, sounding surprised. "Maybe Whitmore's letter is already working. Or maybe they're just planning something bigger." Always so optimistic, she thought, but she couldn't blame him. Experience had taught them both not to trust good fortune. They unsaddled the horses, rubbed them down, gave them feed and water. The animals were exhausted, heads hanging low. Eliza knew how they felt. Inside the house, everything was as they'd left it. Caleb checked the locks, the windows, walked through every room looking for signs of intrusion. Found nothing. "I don't like this," he said. "Maybe they're done. Maybe burning the coop was enough to satisfy them." He looked at her like she'd suggested the sky was green. "They're not done. They're just waiting." "For what?" "For us to relax, get comfortable. Then they'll hit harder." Eliza wanted to tell him he was being paranoid, but the knot in her stomach suggested he was right. That night, they ate a cold supper. Neither of them had the energy to cook, and went to bed early. Separate rooms again. The marriage was legal, documented, filed with the county. But it was still just paper, still just a strategy. Eliza lay in her small room, listening to the house settle around her. Outside, wind rattled the shutters. Somewhere distant, a coyote called. She thought about the chickens, about the sound they'd made dying, about Porter's smile when he'd looked at her, about Whitaker's cold eyes and Harding's reluctance, and all the ways men with power crushed people who challenged them. She thought about giving up, leaving, starting over somewhere far away where no one knew her name. But the thought lasted only a moment, because underneath the fear and exhaustion was something harder. Anger, the kind that didn't burn out quickly. They'd taken everything from her once already. She'd be damned if she let them do it again. The next morning started like any other. Eliza hauled water, started breakfast, swept the floor. Caleb fed the horses, checked the barn, walked the property looking for damage. Routine. Normal. Except nothing felt normal anymore. Around mid-morning, a rider appeared on the horizon. Just one, moving slow and easy. Caleb saw him first, called Eliza out of the house. "Get the rifle," he said. She did, heart hammering. But as the rider got closer, Caleb's posture relaxed slightly. "It's Harding," he said. The sheriff pulled his horse to a stop in front of the porch, tipped his hat. He looked tired, older than he had a week ago. lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Caleb, Mrs. Vance," he said, nodding to each of them. Mrs. Vance. The name still sounded strange to Eliza's ears. "What do you want?" Caleb asked. "To talk, if you'll hear me out." "I'm listening." Harding dismounted, tied his horse. "Can we sit? I've been riding since dawn." Caleb gestured to the porch. They sat. Harding on the steps, Caleb and Eliza on the rail. Close enough to talk, far enough to run if needed. "I heard you went to see Judge Whitmore," Harding said. Caleb's expression didn't change. "Who told you that?" "Doesn't matter. Point is, you're making noise, asking questions in places that make Porter and his friends nervous." "Good." "Is it?" Harding looked between them. "Because nervous men do stupid things, dangerous things." "They already burned my property," Caleb said. "What's left to do?" "A lot, and you know it." Harding rubbed his face. "Look, I'm not here on official business. I'm here because I don't want to see this end badly." "Little late for that." "Maybe, but it can still get worse." The sheriff leaned forward. "Porter's talking about filing criminal charges against you, Caleb. Says you threatened him. Says you obstructed justice. Says you're harboring a wanted fugitive." "Eliza's not a fugitive, and I didn't threaten anyone." "Doesn't matter if it's true. What matters is he's got friends in the territorial legislature, friends who can make those charges stick whether there's evidence or not." Eliza felt cold spread through her chest. "So what are you saying, that we should just give up?" "I'm saying you should think very carefully about your next moves, because if this goes to trial, if it gets that far, you'll lose. The system isn't fair. It's rigged in favor of men like Porter, and fighting it head on will only get you buried." "Then what do we do?" Caleb asked quietly. Harding was silent for a moment. Then, "Whitmore's letters might help. Might. If the territorial governor actually gives a damn, if he sends someone to investigate, maybe things change. But that could take months. In the meantime, you need to keep your heads down. Don't give them ammunition." "They don't need ammunition. They'll make it up." "Probably. But the less truth there is to their lies, the harder it is for them to sell the story." He stood. "I'm telling you this because I respect you, Caleb, and because I think Mrs. Vance was right about Michaels. I can't prove it, can't act on it, but I believe her." It was the closest thing to an apology they were going to get. "Thank you," Eliza said quietly. Harding nodded, climbed back on his horse. "Watch yourselves, and if you see riders coming who aren't me, you run. Don't try to be heroes." He rode away, leaving them standing on the porch in the morning sun. "Do you trust him?" Eliza asked. "Not completely, but I don't think he's lying either." "So what do we do?" Caleb looked out at the land. "We work, we prepare, and we wait." Waiting was harder than fighting. Days stretched into a week, then 2. Every morning, Eliza expected to see riders on the horizon. Every night, she went to bed listening for the sound of boots on the porch, the smell of smoke that meant fire. Nothing happened. The silence was worse than threats. At least with threats, you knew where you stood. This felt like standing on ice, waiting for the crack. They fell into a routine. Caleb worked from dawn until dark, repairing fence, training horses, doing all the tasks that kept a ranch running. Eliza handled the house, the garden, the endless cycle of cooking and cleaning and mending. They ate meals together, spoke when necessary, existed in the same space like 2 planets in orbit around each other. Close, but never touching. At night, Caleb taught her to shoot. Every evening after supper, they'd go out behind the barn, and he'd set up targets, bottles, cans, pieces of wood with marks on them. She'd practice loading, aiming, firing until her shoulder was bruised and her ears rang. She got better. Not good, but better. Could hit a target at 50 feet more often than not. Could load and fire without fumbling. Could keep her hands steady even when her heart was racing. "You're thinking too much," Caleb said one evening, watching her miss a bottle for the 3rd time. "Shooting's like riding. Your body knows what to do if you let it." "My body wants to flinch every time the gun goes off." "Then you need to get past that." He moved behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat of him. "Here, try again. This time, breathe out slow when you pull the trigger. Don't fight the recoil. Let it happen. She did. The rifle kicked back, the bottle exploded. She'd hit it dead center. See, Caleb said, you can do this. Something in his voice made her turn. He was closer than she'd realized, barely a foot between them. For a moment, neither of them moved. She could see the scar on his jaw she'd never noticed before, the flecks of gray in his dark hair, the way his eyes weren't quite gray, more like storm clouds with silver threading through. Caleb, he stepped back. It's getting dark. We should go in. But he walked away before she could say anything else, left her standing there with the rifle in her hands and a strange ache in her chest that had nothing to do with the recoil. 3 weeks after they'd returned from Whitmore's, a letter arrived. Caleb rode into town for supplies, something he'd been avoiding, but they needed flour and coffee and other things they couldn't produce themselves. He came back with a bag of goods and an envelope with the territorial seal on it. It's addressed to both of us, he said, setting it on the table. Eliza's hand shook as she broke the seal. Inside was a single page, written in formal script. To Mr. and Mrs. Caleb Vance, your petition has been received and reviewed. The territorial governor has assigned an investigator to examine the matters raised in your complaint. You should expect a visit from U.S. Marshal James Corrigan within the next 4 to 6 weeks. Please make yourselves available for interviews and provide any evidence you possess. Sincerely, Thomas Bradford, Territorial Secretary. Eliza read it twice, then looked at Caleb. They're sending someone. Looks like it. In 4 to 6 weeks, that could be 2 months from now. Or it could be tomorrow, depending on where the marshal is when he gets the assignment. Do you think he'll actually investigate, or is this just for show? Caleb took the letter, read it himself. I don't know, but it's more than we had before. That night, for the first time in weeks, Eliza felt something like hope. Fragile and uncertain, but real. The feeling lasted exactly 4 days. On the 5th day, riders came. Not Porter this time, not Harding or Whitaker or anyone they recognized. 6 men, hard-looking, armed with rifles and pistols. They rode onto the property like they owned it, spreading out to surround the house. Caleb saw them first. He was in the barn, came running when he heard the horses. Found Eliza in the garden, grabbed her arm. Inside, now! They made it to the house with seconds to spare. Caleb barred the door, grabbed both rifles, handed one to Eliza. Back room, he said. Window faces away from them. If shooting starts, you go through it and run. I'm not leaving you. Eliza? No, we're in this together. Remember? He looked like he wanted to argue, didn't have time. One of the men outside was already shouting, Vance, we know you're in there. Come out and nobody gets hurt. Caleb moved to the window, rifle ready but not visible. State your business. We got a warrant for the arrest of Eliza Hart. She's wanted for theft and defamation. Send her out. She's Eliza Vance now, my wife, and you're trespassing. We got legal authority. You want to see the warrant? Who are you? Name's Briggs. We're deputized by the county. Caleb looked at Eliza, mouthed, It's a lie, then turned back to the window. Show me the warrant and the badges that say you're deputies. A pause. Then one of the men rode closer, holding up a piece of paper. Caleb couldn't read it from this distance, but he could see it looked official, or at least official enough. There's your warrant. Now send her out before we come in and get her. You come in here, people die. That what you want? Don't have to be that way, Vance. Just hand over the woman and we'll leave. You can go on with your life. Eliza moved beside Caleb at the window. They're lying. Porter sent them. I know. So what do we do? Before he could answer, one of the men fired a shot. Not at the house, just into the air. A warning. That's your last chance, Briggs shouted. Next one goes through a window. Caleb's jaw was tight. We can't fight 6 armed men. We can't surrender either. They'll take me and you'll never see me again. I know that too. Another shot, closer this time. It hit the dirt 20 feet from the porch, kicking up dust. Time's up, Vance. Eliza felt her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break her ribs. This was it. The moment where they ran out of options, where talk and strategy and patience stopped mattering because men with guns were forcing a choice. Then Caleb did something she didn't expect. He opened the door, stepped out onto the porch, rifle held loose at his side. Visible, not threatening, but ready. All right, he said, I'll make you a deal. Briggs straightened in his saddle. No deals, hand over the woman. Hear me out first. Caleb's voice was calm, dangerously calm. You boys are here on Porter's orders, not official county business. You're getting paid to intimidate us, maybe to rough up my wife a little, make us too scared to fight back. You don't know what you're talking about. I know you're not real deputies. I know that warrant is probably real paper, but it's not signed by a real judge. And I know if you actually shoot someone here, you'll have to explain it to a U.S. Marshal who's already on his way to investigate corruption in this county. That got a reaction. Briggs and the others exchanged looks. You're bluffing, Briggs said. Am I? You want to bet your life on that? Caleb took a step forward. Here's the deal. You right away now. I don't report this to the marshal. You don't get paid by Porter, but you don't get arrested either. Fair trade. And if we don't? Then we find out how many of you I can drop before you drop me. And even if you win, even if you kill me and take my wife, you'll hang for murder when the truth comes out. Eliza watched from the window, barely breathing. This was insane. He was bluffing with a weak hand, betting everything that these men weren't willing to die for Porter's money. The silence stretched, long enough that Eliza could hear her own pulse in her ears, could count her heartbeats. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then Briggs spat into the dirt. This ain't worth it, he said to his men. Let's go. But Porter said, I don't care what Porter said. I'm not hanging for him. Briggs yanked his horse around. You're lucky today, Vance, but this isn't over. They rode off, kicking up dust as they went. Caleb stood on the porch until they were out of sight. Then his knees buckled and he sat down hard on the steps. Eliza ran out, dropped beside him. Are you all right? No. His hands were shaking. That was the stupidest thing I've ever done. It worked. This time. Next time we might not be so lucky. She grabbed his face, made him look at her. Then we don't give them a next time. We end this. How? I don't know yet, but we figure it out, together. He looked at her, really looked, like he was seeing her for the first time. Then he pulled her close, holding her tight enough that she could feel his heart racing against her chest. Together, he said. They stayed like that, two people holding on to each other in the aftermath of almost dying, until the sun started to set and the temperature dropped and they had to go inside or freeze. That night they didn't sleep in separate rooms, not because anything had changed between them, not officially, but because after nearly losing each other, the distance felt wrong, dangerous even. Caleb lay on one side of the bed, Eliza on the other, the space between them charged with things neither of them knew how to say. Thank you, Eliza said quietly, for what you did today. I didn't do anything except gamble with both our lives. You stood between me and them, again. He was quiet. Then, I meant what I said earlier, about this not being over. I know. They'll keep coming, different faces, different tactics, but the same goal. They want you gone. Then we make them stop wanting that. How? She rolled onto her side, facing him in the dark. We go on the offensive. We stop waiting for them to hit us and start hitting back. With what? We don't have proof. We don't have power. We have the truth. And we have time now, before the marshal arrives. Time to gather evidence, to talk to people who might have been hurt by Michaels the same way I was. To build a case that's too solid to ignore. Caleb turned toward her. She could barely see his face in the darkness, just the outline of him. That means going back to town, he said. Confronting people who hate you. Yes. They'll make it dangerous. They've already made it dangerous. He reached out, found her hand in the dark. Held it. All right. We do it your way. But we're careful. We're smart. And we don't take risks we don't have to. Agreed. His thumb moved over her knuckles, gentle. I'm scared, he said quietly. I don't want to lose you. The admission shocked her. Caleb didn't admit fear, didn't admit weakness. But here in the dark, with death still fresh in their minds, the walls had cracked. You won't, she said. We're harder to kill than they think. I hope you're right. They fell asleep like that, hands linked, breathing synchronized. And for the first time since this all started, Eliza dreamed of something other than fire and falling. She dreamed of winning. They started planning the next morning over coffee that had gone cold while they talked. Eliza spread a piece of paper on the table, started making a list. Names of people who might help, people who'd been in town long enough to remember, people who'd donated money to the church and might wonder where it went. Susan Miller, she said, writing it down. She was there the day I confronted Michaels. Didn't speak up, but I saw her face. She believed me. Will she talk to you now? I don't know, but she's old enough not to care what Porter thinks. That's something. Caleb added another name. Tom Yeager. He witnessed our marriage, remember? Works odd jobs around town. Keeps his head down, but he hears things. Who else? They went through the town in their minds, person by person. The blacksmith who'd been asking questions about church finances before Eliza ever did. The widow who donated her late husband's savings and then couldn't pay her rent. The farmer who'd sold his land to cover debts after giving everything he had to the charity drive. People who'd been hurt. People who might be ready to speak if someone gave them the chance. By noon, they had a list of 12 names. Not much, but it was a start. We go in together, Caleb said. You don't talk to anyone alone. Too dangerous. They'll see us coming. Word will spread. Let it spread. Maybe that'll scare someone into talking before we even ask. They rode into town the next day, mid-morning when the streets were busy enough that their presence would be noticed, but not so crowded they couldn't move. Caleb kept his rifle across his saddle. Visible. Not threatening, but there. People stared. A woman pulling wash from a line stopped mid-reach, mouth open. Two men outside the saloon watched them pass, one of them spitting deliberately into the dirt. A child pointed until his mother yanked his arm down and pulled him inside. Friendly place, Eliza muttered. Just keep moving. They headed for the edge of town where Susan Miller lived, a small house with a neat garden and chickens scratching in the yard. Caleb tied the horses to the fence while Eliza knocked. Susan opened the door, saw Eliza, and immediately tried to close it again. Eliza stuck her boot in the gap. Please, just 5 minutes. I can't talk to you. You know I can't. Because you're scared or because you don't believe me. Susan's lined face twisted. What difference does it make? All the difference. If you believe me, then you know what Michaels did was wrong. If you're just scared, then I'm asking you to be brave for 5 minutes. That's all. The old woman stood there, hand on the door, visibly torn. Then she sighed and stepped back. 5 minutes. But if anyone sees you here, I'll deny we ever spoke. Inside, the house smelled like bread and old wood. Susan didn't offer them seats, just stood with her arms crossed, waiting. I need to know what you saw, Eliza said. The donation records. You helped organize the charity drive 3 years ago. You had to have seen the ledgers. I saw numbers, that's all. Did those numbers make sense to you? Susan hesitated. No. Why not? Because we collected over $4,000. I counted it myself, but the dispersal records only showed $2,000 going out to families in need. When I asked Michaels about the difference, he said it went to operating expenses. $2,000 in operating expenses? That's what he said. I didn't question it. Wasn't my place. Eliza leaned forward. But you thought it was wrong. I thought a lot of things. Thinking doesn't change anything. It does if you're willing to say it out loud, to someone official. Susan's eyes flicked to Caleb, then back to Eliza. You're talking about that marshal, aren't you? The one everyone's whispering about. Yes. And you think if I tell him what I saw, it'll make a difference? I think it's evidence. I think it corroborates what I've been saying all along. Susan walked to the window, looked out at her garden. I'm 73 years old. I've lived in this town my whole life. Everyone I know is here. If I speak against Michaels, against Porter, I'll be an outcast just like you. Or you'll be someone who stood up for what's right. Right doesn't keep you warm in winter. Right doesn't buy food when the store won't sell to you. Eliza felt frustration rising, but pushed it down. I'm not asking you to decide now. I'm asking you to think about it. And when the marshal comes, if he asks you questions, just tell him the truth. That's all. Susan turned back to them. The truth is dangerous. So is lying. They stared at each other. Then Susan nodded slowly. I'll think about it. That's all I can promise. It wasn't much, but it was something. They visited 3 more people that day. The blacksmith, a man named Howard with arms like tree trunks, slammed the door in their faces. The widow, Mrs. Chen, invited them in but refused to talk about anything except the weather and her arthritis. The farmer had moved away months ago, address unknown. By the time they rode back to the ranch, Eliza felt deflated. This isn't working. They're too scared. We knew it wouldn't be easy. Easy? We got one maybe and 3 doors slammed in our faces. One maybe is better than nothing. We keep trying. But the next day brought worse news. Tom Yeager, the man who'd witnessed their marriage, was found beaten behind the saloon. Not dead, but close. Someone had worked him over with fists and boots until he couldn't walk. Harding came out to the ranch to tell them personally. He's alive. Barely. Says he doesn't remember who did it. But you know, Caleb said. I suspect. Can't prove it. No witnesses or none willing to come forward. Harding looked tired. This is what I was warning you about. You start making noise, people get hurt. So we should stop? Just let them win? I'm saying you need to be smarter about this. Because next time it might not be Tom in that alley. It might be you. After Harding left, Eliza sat at the table staring at nothing. This is my fault. Tom got hurt because of me. No, he got hurt because Porter's people are violent criminals. That's on them. I should go see him, apologize. You should stay far away from him. Associating with us is what got him beaten. Showing up at his bedside will only make it worse. She knew he was right. Hated that he was right. So what do we do? Caleb paced the room, thinking. We need proof that doesn't rely on witness testimony. Something physical. Documents, records. Anything that can't be intimidated into silence. The church records. The ones I found originally. You think they're still there? I don't know. But if Michael's destroyed them, that's suspicious in itself. If he didn't, she looked up. We need to get into that office. That's breaking and entering. You have a better idea? He didn't. They spent 2 days planning. The church office was on the 2nd floor of the building, accessible by an outside staircase. There was a window that faced the alley. Eliza remembered because she'd looked out it while organizing files. The lock on the door was old, probably pickable if you knew what you were doing. Caleb knew what he was doing. Army taught me a few things, he said when Eliza asked. Wasn't all shooting and marching. They waited for a moonless night, rode into town after midnight when even the saloons were quiet, left the horses tied in an alley 3 blocks from the church and approached on foot. The building loomed against the dark sky, white paint ghostly in the starlight. No lights in the windows, no movement in the street. Eliza's heart hammered so hard she thought people would hear it from inside their houses. You sure about this? Caleb whispered. No, let's do it anyway. They climbed the stairs, each step creaking under their weight. At the top, Caleb pulled a thin piece of metal from his pocket and worked it into the lock. Seconds passed like hours. Then a soft click and the door swung open. Inside, the office smelled like dust and old paper. Eliza's eyes adjusted slowly, shapes emerging from darkness. The desk where she'd worked, filing cabinets along one wall, a bookshelf. Everything just as she remembered. Where would the records be? Caleb asked, voice barely audible. Filing cabinet, 2nd drawer, unless he moved them. He crossed to the cabinet, tried the drawer, locked. He worked the lock like he had the door, faster this time. The drawer slid open with a metallic scrape that sounded deafening in the quiet. Eliza moved beside him, pulled out files. Church membership, marriage records, baptisms, financial records, there. She grabbed the folder, opened it. Empty. No, she breathed. No, they were here. Right here. Caleb checked the other drawers, all empty of anything useful. He cleaned house. Eliza wanted to scream. They'd risked everything coming here and found nothing. There has to be something. He can't have destroyed everything. She started searching the desk, drawers full of pens, paper, sealing wax, nothing incriminating. She was about to give up when her hand hit something under the desk's bottom drawer. A catch, cleverly hidden. She pressed it. A false bottom popped open. Inside was a ledger, leather-bound, pages filled with neat handwriting. Eliza pulled it out, opened it. Donation records, names, amounts, dates. And beside them, in a different column, dispersal records. But the numbers didn't match what the official records showed. The official records that claimed 2,000 went to charity. This ledger showed different numbers. Much different. We need to go, Caleb said urgently. Now. Eliza clutched the ledger. This is it. This proves everything. Great. Let's prove it somewhere that isn't breaking the law. They moved toward the door. Caleb opened it, checked the stairs, started to step out. Light blazed in their faces. 3 men with lanterns stood at the bottom of the stairs. One of them was Porter. Another was Whitaker. The third was a deputy Eliza didn't recognize. Well, Porter said, smiling. Breaking and entering. Theft of church property. I'd say we have all the evidence we need now. Caleb's hand went to his gun. Porter's smile widened. Go ahead. Draw on a county official. That's a hanging offense. You're not a county official, Caleb said. You're a land clerk, and a member of the council, and a concerned citizen who saw suspicious activity at the church and alerted the proper authorities. He gestured to the deputy. Arrest them both. The deputy started up the stairs. Caleb moved back, putting himself between the man and Eliza. Don't, he said quietly. Vance, you're making this worse, the deputy said. He sounded young, nervous. This is a setup, you know it is. I know I got called here by a councilman reporting a break-in, and I found you inside a locked building that you have no right to be in. We're taking evidence of fraud. You're stealing church property. Now put down the gun and come peaceful, or this ends badly. Eliza's mind raced. They couldn't fight 3 men. Couldn't run without getting shot in the back. Couldn't... She stepped forward, holding up the ledger. This book proves Reverend Michaels stole thousands of dollars from people who trusted him. That's why Porter's here. Not to arrest criminals, but to protect one. That's slander, Whitaker said sharply. It's truth. And when the federal marshal sees this, everyone's going to know it. Porter's expression hardened. You're not going to live long enough to show it to any marshal. Now give me that book. No. He pulled a gun from his coat. I said give me the book. Caleb's rifle came up, pointed at Porter. The deputy's gun pointed at Caleb. Whitaker pulled his own weapon, aimed at Eliza. 3 guns, 3 targets, everyone frozen in a tableau of mutually assured destruction. Somebody's going to die here, Porter said. Question is who? You want it to be your wife, Vance? Because I'll shoot her right now if you don't lower that rifle. You shoot her, I shoot you. Simple math. And my men shoot you. Then we take the book anyway and burn it, along with your bodies. Call it a tragic accident, caught breaking into the church. Fire started somehow. You both died trying to escape. Very sad. Eliza's hands were shaking. This was it. The moment where everything collapsed, where Porter finally won. Then a new voice cut through the tension. That would be murder, Mr. Porter. Federal crime. I'd have to arrest you. Everyone turned. A man stood at the edge of the lantern light, just visible. Tall, wearing a long coat with a badge on his chest that caught the light. A U.S. Marshal's badge. Who the hell are you? Porter demanded. Marshal James Corrigan, and you are all making my job extremely easy tonight. He stepped forward, hand on his own weapon. Deputy, lower your gun. Mr. Porter, Mr. Whitaker, same for you. Now. This is county business, Porter said. You have no jurisdiction. Federal investigation into territorial corruption gives me all the jurisdiction I need. Now lower your weapons before I add threatening a federal officer to the list of charges I'm already considering. The deputy lowered his gun first. Smart kid. Whitaker followed reluctantly. Porter held out longest, jaw tight with fury, but eventually he lowered his weapon too. Corrigan looked at Caleb. You too, Mr. Vance. Let's all calm down. Caleb lowered the rifle slowly. Corrigan moved between them, taking control of the situation with the easy confidence of someone who'd done this 100 times before. Mrs. Vance, I'll need to see that ledger, and I'll need statements from all of you about what happened here tonight. They broke into the church, Porter started. I'm aware. I've been watching this building for 3 hours. Saw you gentlemen arrive. Saw you arrange yourselves at the bottom of the stairs like you were setting a trap. Interesting timing, wouldn't you say? Porter's face went dark red. I received a tip. From whom? Because there's no one else around. Just you, conveniently showing up right when Mr. and Mrs. Vance entered the building, almost like you knew they'd be here. Whitaker shifted. We were conducting regular patrol. At 1 in the morning? In an alley behind a church? Corrigan smiled, thin and cold. Gentlemen, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I know a setup when I see one. Now here's what's going to happen. You're all going to come with me to a neutral location, Judge Whitmore's house, I think. and we're going to sort this out properly. Anyone objects?" No one objected. They rode through the dark streets in a bizarre procession, the marshal leading, Eliza and Caleb behind him, Porter and his men bringing up the rear. A deputy ran ahead to wake Whitmore and warn him company was coming. By the time they arrived, the judge was dressed and waiting, his study lit by a dozen lamps. He looked at the group filing into his house and raised his eyebrows. "Marshal, I assume this is related to my letters." "Very much so, Judge." Corrigan gestured everyone to seats. "We're going to have a conversation, a long one, and by the end of it, I'll decide who gets arrested and who goes home." They talked until dawn. Corrigan questioned everyone separately, then together. He examined the ledger Eliza had taken, comparing it to copies of official records Porter was forced to produce. He took testimony about the fire at the ranch, the armed men who'd shown up, the beating of Tom Yeager. Porter denied everything, claimed he was just a concerned citizen trying to maintain order, claimed Eliza was a troublemaker and Caleb was harboring a criminal, claimed the ledger was a forgery. But Corrigan wasn't a small-town sheriff who could be bullied or bought. He was federal law, and he had resources Porter couldn't touch. "I'll need to speak with Reverend Michaels," Corrigan said when the questioning was done. "And several others on the list Mrs. Vance provided. This investigation will take time, weeks probably. In the meantime, no one leaves the territory without my permission. Understood?" Porter stood stiffly. "This is harassment. I'll be filing a complaint with—" "File whatever you want. I answer to federal authority, not county councils. You're dismissed." After Porter and his men left, Corrigan turned to Eliza and Caleb. "You two took a hell of a risk tonight." "We didn't have a choice," Eliza said. "There's always a choice. Yours was just braver than most." He handed the ledger back to her. "I'm keeping this as evidence, but I've made copies. And I want you to know, what you did tonight, it matters. This ledger is exactly the kind of proof I needed." "So you believe us?" Caleb asked. "I believe the evidence. And the evidence says someone's been stealing from this community for years. Whether it's Michaels or Porter or both, I'll figure out. But yes, Mrs. Vance, I believe you told the truth." Eliza felt something break open in her chest, relief so intense it almost hurt. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. This isn't over. Porter and his friends will fight back. They'll hire lawyers, call in favors, do everything they can to discredit you and this investigation. It's going to get ugly." "It's already ugly," Caleb said. "Fair point." Corrigan stood. "Get some rest. I'll be in touch soon." They left Whitmore's house as the sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The town was waking up, smoke from chimneys, sounds of people starting their days. Normal life, continuing like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. They rode back to the ranch in silence, both too exhausted to talk. When they finally reached home, Caleb unsaddled the horses while Eliza started coffee. They moved around each other like they had for weeks now, synchronized and careful. But when the coffee was ready and they sat at the table together, Caleb reached across and took her hand. "We did it," he said. "We did something. I don't know if it's enough. It's enough for today. Tomorrow we'll do more." Eliza looked at him. This man who'd married her to protect her, who'd stood between her and violence again and again, who'd risked everything for a truth that wasn't even his fight. This stranger who'd become the most important person in her world. "I love you," she said. The words surprised them both. They'd never talked about feelings, never acknowledged the shift that had happened between them. It was just supposed to be a legal arrangement, protection, strategy. But somewhere along the way, it had become real. Caleb stared at her. "Eliza, you don't have to say it back. I just needed to say it. Because we almost died tonight, and I didn't want to not have said it." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, pulled her up with him, and kissed her. Not gentle, not careful. Like he'd been holding back for weeks and couldn't anymore. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, he said, "I love you too. Have for a while now. Just didn't know how to say it." "You could have started with that." "I'm not good with words." "You're doing fine right now." He kissed her again, slower this time. And when they finally went to bed, the big bed together, no pretense of separate rooms, it wasn't because they were scared or because the marriage was just paper. It was because they chose each other, freely, completely. The next weeks were a blur of activity. Corrigan interviewed everyone in town, gathered evidence, built his case. Susan Miller, emboldened by the marshal's presence, gave her testimony about the donation discrepancies. Howard the blacksmith, who'd slammed the door on them before, came forward with his own story of being overcharged for church repairs. Others followed. Slowly, piece by piece, the truth came together. Reverend Michaels tried to run, got as far as the next county before Corrigan's deputies caught him. When confronted with the evidence, he broke down and confessed everything: the skimmed donations, the fake invoices, the payments to Porter, and the council members who'd helped him cover it up. Porter fought harder, hired expensive lawyers from back east, called in favors from territorial officials, but the evidence was too solid. The ledger Eliza had found, combined with testimony from dozens of witnesses, painted a picture too clear to deny. 3 months after that night at the church, formal charges were filed: fraud, theft, conspiracy, abuse of office. Michaels and Porter both. 2 council members. The attorney Whitaker, who'd known about the scheme and helped enforce it. The trial was set for early spring. Eliza stood in the garden pulling weeds when she heard the wagon coming. She looked up to see Caleb driving toward the house, and beside him, sitting on the bench, was a load of lumber. "What's that for?" she called. He pulled the wagon to a stop, grinned at her. Actually grinned, something she'd seen maybe 3 times in all the months she'd known him. "New chicken coop," he said. Figured it was time to rebuild. She walked over, looked at the wood. Good quality, fresh cut. Must have cost a fair amount. "We can afford this?" "We can now. Sold those 2 horses I've been training. Got a good price." He climbed down, came around to her side. "And I've been thinking, this ranch could support more than just cattle. Maybe sheep. Maybe some pigs. Build it up properly." "That sounds like long-term planning." "It is." "Sounds like you're planning to stay." He pulled her close. "I'm planning for us to stay, if that's what you want." Eliza looked around at the land, harsh and beautiful and unforgiving, the place that had been her last chance and had become her home. "It's what I want." "Good, because I'm not done building things yet." They rebuilt the chicken coop together over the next week. Caleb did the heavy work. Eliza helped where she could. It was bigger than the old one, sturdier, built to last. When it was finished, they bought 30 new chickens from a farmer 2 counties over. Started fresh. It felt like a metaphor for everything else they were building. Winter came early that year, bringing snow that turned the brown landscape white and clean. The trial was scheduled for March, which meant months of waiting while the territorial courts sorted through evidence and lawyers filed motions, and the wheels of justice turned at their own glacial pace. Eliza thought the waiting would drive her crazy. Instead, it gave her something she hadn't had in years: time to just live. She and Caleb fell into rhythms that felt almost normal. Morning coffee together, watching the sun rise over land that was slowly becoming theirs in more than just a legal sense. Work during the day, hard work, the kind that left them both exhausted but satisfied. Evenings by the fire, reading or talking or just sitting in comfortable silence. They were learning each other. The small things that mattered. How Caleb took his coffee, black, no sugar, hot enough to scald. How Eliza couldn't sleep if the room was too quiet, needed the window cracked even in winter to hear the wind. How they both woke in the middle of the night sometimes, reaching for each other before they were fully conscious, needing to know the other was still there. "You ever think about what comes after?" Eliza asked one night, lying in bed with her head on Caleb's chest, listening to his heartbeat. "After what?" "After the trial. After this is all over. What do we do then?" He was quiet for a moment, his hand moving through her hair in slow, steady strokes. "We live. We build. We make this place into something that lasts. That simple? Why does it have to be complicated?" She smiled against his skin. "You're right, it doesn't." But she knew it wouldn't be that simple. The trial was coming, and with it would come a reckoning, not just for Michaels and Porter, but for everyone involved, including her. The subpoena came in January, delivered by one of Corrigan's deputies. Eliza was required to testify, to stand in front of a courtroom full of people who hated her and tell her story under oath while lawyers tried to tear it apart. "I'll be right there," Caleb said when she told him. every second. You won't be alone. I know. I just... She looked down at the paper in her hands. What if they don't believe me? What if all of this was for nothing? Then we'll deal with it, together. He took her hands. But they will believe you, because you're telling the truth, and the evidence backs you up. That matters. She wanted to believe him, tried to. But doubt was a constant companion now, whispering in the quiet moments that maybe the system was too broken, maybe men like Porter always won in the end. Maybe justice was just a story people told themselves to feel better about an unfair world. February brought news that changed everything. Marshal Corrigan rode out to the ranch personally, which told Eliza before he even spoke that something significant had happened. He sat at their table, accepting coffee but barely touching it. "Porter's dead," he said without preamble. Eliza's cup stopped halfway to her lips. "What?" "Found him in his office this morning. Single gunshot to the head. His own gun beside him." Corrigan's face was grim. "Looks like suicide." Caleb leaned back in his chair. "You believe that?" "The evidence supports it. Door was locked from the inside, no signs of struggle. He left a note." "What did it say?" Eliza asked. "Confession, full admission of guilt. The fraud, the intimidation, the violence, all of it." Corrigan pulled a folded paper from his coat. "I brought a copy for you to read. Thought you'd want to see it." Eliza took the paper with hands that shook slightly, unfolded it. Porter's handwriting, she recognized it from documents she'd seen, neat and controlled even at the end. "I can no longer live with what I've done. The lies, the theft, the harm caused to innocent people. Eliza Hart told the truth, and I helped destroy her for it. I helped Reverend Michaels steal from those who could least afford it. I threatened, intimidated, and caused violence to protect our crimes. I am guilty of everything she accused us of, and more. This is my confession and my punishment. Gerald Porter." She read it twice, then set it down carefully on the table, like it might explode. "This changes the trial," she said. "It does. Michaels's lawyers are already trying to use it, claiming Porter acted alone, that Michaels was coerced or didn't know the full extent of the fraud. It's garbage, but they'll argue it." "Will it work?" Corrigan shook his head. "Not with the evidence we have. The ledger you found, the testimony from witnesses, Michael's own partial confession before Porter died. No, the trial will still happen. But Porter's death removes one defendant and potentially makes the others more willing to deal." "Deal?" Caleb's voice was hard. "After everything they did?" "Justice isn't always clean, Mr. Vance. Sometimes it's about getting the best outcome you can, not the perfect one." Corrigan stood. "The trial starts in 3 weeks. Be ready." After he left, Eliza sat staring at Porter's confession. "Do you think he really killed himself? Does it matter?" "I don't know. Maybe." She looked up at Caleb. "Part of me is glad he's dead. Part of me wanted to see him face justice in court. And part of me just feels tired." "That's fair. All of it." "Is it? Should I feel guilty for being glad someone's dead?" Caleb came around the table, pulled her up into his arms. "You feel what you feel. Porter made his choices. He hurt people, destroyed lives, and when he got caught, he took the coward's way out. You don't owe him anything, not even guilt." She pressed her face against his shoulder. "I want this to be over. Soon, 3 more weeks." But 3 weeks felt like forever. The town changed after Porter's death. It was subtle at first. People who'd avoided eye contact before now nodded in passing. The store owner who'd refused her service grudgingly accepted Caleb's business again. Small cracks in the wall of hostility. Then came the letter from Susan Miller. Short, written in shaky handwriting. "Dear Mrs. Vance, I want you to know I'm testifying at the trial. I've been a coward long enough. Porter's death showed me that silence has a cost too. I may lose friends over this, but I'll still have my conscience. Susan." Other letters followed. From the blacksmith. From Mrs. Chen, the widow. From people Eliza had never met who'd been hurt by the fraud and were finally ready to speak up. It felt like the dam was breaking. The morning they left for town for the trial was cold and clear. Eliza dressed in her best clothes, which still weren't much. A dark blue dress she'd mended so many times the seams were more thread than fabric. Her mother's wedding ring on her finger, the only jewelry she owned. Caleb wore a suit he'd bought in town the week before. It didn't fit him quite right, too tight in the shoulders, too loose in the waist, but he looked almost civilized in it, almost like someone who belonged in a courtroom instead of a barn. "Ready?" he asked. She wasn't, but she nodded anyway. The courthouse was packed, every seat filled, people standing along the walls, more crowded outside the windows trying to hear. Eliza had expected an audience. This was the biggest thing to happen in the territory in years, but the reality of all those eyes on her made her stomach turn. Corrigan met them at the entrance. "Mrs. Vance? Mr. Vance, you'll be seated in the front. The prosecutor wants you visible to the jury." "Why?" "Because you're the victim here. They need to see that. See you as a real person, not just a name in documents." They took their seats. Eliza tried not to look at the crowd, but she felt them watching, judging, some sympathetic now maybe, others still hostile. The town hadn't forgiven her yet, might never fully forgive her. The judge entered, an old man with white hair and a face like weathered stone. Everyone stood. He called the court to order, and the trial began. The prosecution went first, laid out the case methodically, the donation drives, the missing money, the false records. They called witnesses. Susan Miller, voice steady despite her age, testifying about the discrepancies she'd seen. Howard the blacksmith talking about inflated charges for church repairs that were never done. Widow Chen explaining how she donated her husband's life savings and then couldn't afford to bury him properly. Each testimony built on the last. Each one, another brick in the wall of evidence. Then they called Reverend Michaels to the stand. He looked smaller than Eliza remembered. Thinner, like the weight of his crimes had physically diminished him. He swore to tell the truth and sat down, hands folded in his lap, eyes down. The prosecutor asked him direct questions. Did he take money from the donation funds? Yes. Did he falsify records? Yes. Did he work with Gerald Porter to cover up the fraud? Yes, yes, yes. And did you, Reverend Michaels, encourage members of your congregation to ostracize Mrs. Eliza Vance when she attempted to expose your crimes? Michaels was quiet for a long moment, then barely audible. Yes. Did you call her a liar? A troublemaker? Did you use your position of religious authority to turn the community against her? Yes. Why? Because I was afraid. Afraid of being caught. Afraid of losing everything I'd built. His voice cracked. I convinced myself she was wrong, that she was misunderstanding, that I had good reasons for what I'd done. But I knew. I always knew. The courtroom was silent. Even the people who'd stood by Michaels seemed stunned by his admission. The prosecutor continued. And the violence that followed? The harassment of Mrs. Vance and her husband? Did you authorize that? Porter handled that. I didn't explicitly authorize, but you knew about it. Pause. Yes. And you did nothing to stop it. No, I did nothing. When the defense cross-examined, they tried to rehabilitate him. Talked about his years of service to the community, the good he'd done before the fraud started, his cooperation with the investigation. They painted him as a man who'd made mistakes but deserved mercy. Eliza listened and felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just emptiness where all the rage had been. Then the prosecution called her. She walked to the witness stand on legs that felt disconnected from her body, swore to tell the truth, sat down. The prosecutor, a sharp-faced woman named Catherine Marsh, gave her an encouraging nod. Mrs. Vance, can you tell the court how you first discovered the financial discrepancies? Eliza took a breath. I was helping organize a charity drive for families affected by the drought 3 years ago. Part of my job was filing donation records. I noticed the amounts collected didn't match the amounts distributed. When I asked Reverend Michaels about it, he told me it was administrative costs. But the numbers didn't make sense. $2,000 in administrative costs for a charity drive? What did you do then? I kept looking. Found more discrepancies going back years, tens of thousands of dollars unaccounted for. So I brought it to the county council. And what happened? They dismissed me, said I was mistaken. said I didn't understand how church finances worked. But you persisted. Yes, because I knew what I'd seen. I knew the numbers didn't lie. And when you made your findings public, Eliza looked out at the crowd, saw faces she recognized, people who'd turned their backs on her, who'd called her names, who'd made her life unbearable. I was destroyed, she said quietly, socially, professionally, personally. People I'd known my whole life refused to speak to me. I couldn't get work, couldn't buy supplies. The Reverend stood in front of the entire congregation and called me a liar, a troublemaker, suggested I was mentally unstable. How did that make you feel? Powerless, angry, afraid. She looked at Michaels. He wouldn't meet her eyes. But mostly certain, because their reaction proved I was right. If I'd been wrong, they would have just ignored me. Instead, they tried to destroy me. The defense attorney, a slick man from back east, stood for cross-examination. Mrs. Vance, isn't it true that you were engaged to be married before all this started, and that engagement was broken off? Yes. And isn't it true that you had a reputation in town for being difficult, opinionated? I had a reputation for speaking my mind. If that's difficult, then yes. You attended church meetings regularly and often questioned decisions made by church leadership, didn't you? I asked questions when things didn't make sense. That's not a crime, but it does suggest a pattern of behavior, of someone who sought attention by causing controversy. Eliza felt anger flash through her. I didn't seek attention. I sought truth. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you made wild accusations against respected community members, and when those accusations were questioned, you doubled down rather than admit you might be wrong. The accusations weren't wild. They were accurate, as the evidence proves. Evidence you obtained by breaking into a church office, evidence that could have been fabricated or altered. I didn't fabricate anything. That ledger was exactly where I found it, hidden by Reverend Michaels because it proved his guilt. The attorney circled closer. Or hidden by you after you created it to support false claims. Marshal Corrigan stood. Objection, Your Honor. The ledger's authenticity has been verified by handwriting experts. This line of questioning is baseless. The judge nodded. Sustained. Move on, counselor. The defense attorney tried other angles, questioning her motives, her mental state, whether she'd ever been diagnosed with any disorders. Eliza answered each question calmly, refusing to be rattled. Finally, he sat down. No further questions. Eliza stepped down from the stand. Caleb caught her as she passed, squeezed her hand once. That brief touch steadied her. The trial continued for 3 more days. More witnesses, more evidence, more legal arguments. The defense tried everything, claiming Michaels had been coerced by Porter, that the amounts were exaggerated, that the fraud was less extensive than claimed. But the evidence was overwhelming. The ledger, the testimonies, Michaels' own confession. On the 4th day, the jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman read the verdict. On the charge of fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of theft, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of conspiracy, we find the defendant guilty. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Michaels to 15 years in territorial prison. His assets would be seized and used to repay the victims of his fraud. He would never hold a position of authority again. When the gavel came down, Eliza felt something release in her chest. Not joy, exactly, not even satisfaction, just completion. Like a wound that had been open for years finally scabbing over. Outside the courthouse, people crowded around them, some to apologize, awkward, halting apologies that Eliza accepted without warmth, some to thank her for her courage, some just to stare, to be part of the moment. Susan Miller pushed through the crowd, took Eliza's hands in her weathered ones. Thank you, she said, for not giving up, for showing us what real courage looks like. I wasn't courageous, Eliza said. I was just stubborn. Sometimes that's the same thing. They rode back to the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Neither of them spoke much. There was too much to process, too many emotions tangled together. At home, they sat on the porch, watching the last light fade from the sky. The new chicken coop was visible from here, solid and permanent. The barn they'd repaired together. The garden they'd planted. signs of a life being built piece by piece from the ruins of what had been destroyed. "You did it," Caleb said finally. "You won." "We won," Eliza corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." "You could have. You're the strongest person I've ever met." She leaned against him. "I don't feel strong. I feel tired." "That's because you've been fighting for so long. It's okay to rest now." "Is it over? Really over?" "The trial is. The rest, how people treat you, whether the town fully accepts you back, that'll take time. Maybe a long time, maybe never completely." "I can live with that." She looked up at him. "As long as I have this, us, this place, that's enough." He kissed her forehead. "More than enough." The money from the seized assets started being distributed in April. Not everyone got back everything they'd lost. Some of it was gone, spent years ago on Porter's house and Michael's comfort. But they got something, enough to help. Widow Chen got enough to properly maintain her late husband's grave and have a little left over. Howard the blacksmith got reimbursed for the inflated charges. Susan Miller donated her portion to establish a legitimate charity fund, one with transparent accounting and oversight. Eliza and Caleb got a small amount, compensation for the burned chicken coop and the harassment they'd endured. It wasn't much, but it helped. They used it to buy sheep, like Caleb had talked about, started building the ranch into something bigger. Word of the trial spread beyond the territory. A newspaper in Denver wrote about it, the woman who'd stood up to corruption and won. Other papers picked up the story. Eliza received letters from strangers, women mostly, telling her she'd inspired them to speak up about injustices in their own communities. She didn't feel inspiring. She felt like someone who'd been pushed into a corner and fought back because there was no other choice. But if her story helped others find their courage, then maybe all the pain had meant something. Summer came. The sheep thrived. The garden produced more vegetables than they could eat, so they sold the excess in town. Slowly, grudgingly, the community began to accept them back. Not everyone. There were still people who crossed the street when they saw Eliza coming, who wouldn't meet her eyes. But enough. Enough that they could function, could trade, could exist without constant hostility. One evening in late July, Eliza was pulling weeds in the garden when she felt Caleb's arms wrap around her from behind. "What are you doing?" she asked, leaning back against him. "Appreciating my wife." "Your wife is covered in dirt and probably smells like the sheep pen." "Don't care." He turned her around. "I've been thinking." "Dangerous." He smiled. "About how different things are now. A year ago, you showed up here with nothing. I was alone, angry at the world, just going through the motions. And now," he gestured at the ranch, "now we have this. A real life. Together. Regret it? Not for a second. Even the hard parts. Especially the hard parts, maybe. Because they proved we could survive anything." Eliza touched his face, tracing the scar on his jaw. "I used to think I needed to prove my worth, to make people see that I mattered, that what I said was true. But I don't need that anymore. The only person whose opinion matters is yours. And mine." "And what's your opinion?" "That we built something good here. Something that'll last. Not because it's perfect, but because we keep choosing it, keep choosing each other." "I'll always choose you," Caleb said, "even when you're covered in dirt and smell like sheep." She laughed, actually laughed, full and free. "Romantic. I try. They stood there in the garden as the sun set, holding each other, covered in the honest dirt of hard work. Around them, the ranch hummed with life, chickens clucking, sheep bleating in the distance, wind rustling through the growing crops. The sound of a place that was lived in, loved, fought for. It wasn't perfect. The house still needed repairs. The barn roof leaked when it rained hard. There were neighbors who would never forgive her, scars that would never fully heal. Justice had been done, but it hadn't erased the past. But that was life, wasn't it? Imperfect, messy, full of people who made mistakes and hurt each other, and sometimes, if they were lucky and brave enough, found ways to build something better from the wreckage. That fall, they expanded the house. Added a second bedroom, for guests, they told each other, though both of them knew it was really in case they ever had children. Building for a future they were only just beginning to imagine. On the anniversary of their hasty marriage, Caleb surprised Eliza with a ring. Nothing fancy, just a simple silver band he'd had made in town. But it fit perfectly, and when he slipped it on her finger, she cried. "We're already married," she said, laughing through tears. "I know, but the first time was strategy. This is choice." He held her hand. "I choose you, Eliza Vance, every day, for the rest of my life. I choose you too, even when you're grumpy and don't talk for hours. Especially then." They had a small celebration, just the two of them, a good meal, a bottle of wine Caleb had been saving. They toasted to survival, to justice, to love that grew in unlikely soil. Later that night, lying in bed, Eliza thought about the woman who'd arrived at this ranch a year and a half ago. Desperate, angry, certain she was at the end of everything. That woman had been broken by a town that refused to believe her, cast out for the crime of telling truth. But she'd been wrong. It wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Not a smooth beginning, not an easy one, but real, honest. Built on the bedrock of two people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and refused to let those circumstances define them. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb asked, pulling her closer. "How far we've come. How much has changed." "You happy?" She considered the question. Happiness felt too simple a word for what she felt. It was more complex than that. Relief and satisfaction and hard-won peace mixed with the knowledge that life would keep throwing challenges at them, that the fight was never really over. But yes, underneath all of it, threading through everything else, was happiness. "Yes," she said, "I'm happy." "Good. Me too." Outside, winter was coming again, but inside they were warm, together, building something that would outlast the seasons, the storms, the people who tried to destroy them. They'd claimed their worth not by convincing others, but by refusing to accept anything less than truth. They'd found belonging not by fitting into a world that rejected them, but by creating their own world on their own terms. And in the end, that was worth more than any verdict, any vindication, any apology from people who should have believed them all along. They had each other. They had this land. They had the future they were building together, one day at a time. That was enough. That was everything. Years later, when people asked Eliza about the trial, about standing up to powerful men who'd tried to silence her, she'd tell them the truth. It wasn't about being brave or strong or special. It was about being stubborn enough to survive when survival seemed impossible. About refusing to disappear just because someone wanted you gone. "The world tries to tell you who you are," she'd say. "Especially if you're a woman. Especially if you're poor or difficult, or don't fit their idea of what you should be. But you don't have to accept their story. You can write your own." And she had. They both had. In the dirt and sweat and struggle of building a life that no one handed them, that they fought for and bled for and earned with everything they had. Not a perfect life, but an honest one. Not an easy life, but a good one. And when Eliza died, many years later, old and weathered and surrounded by the family she and Caleb had built, her last thought was of that first day on the ranch, standing in the dust with nothing but a worn bag and stubbornness, looking at a man who'd offered her the smallest chance, and how that smallest chance had been enough. Because sometimes all you need is one person who believes you, one place to stand, one reason to keep fighting. The rest, you build yourself.